Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where the old stones of this planet are never quite as quiet as they seem, and where history can settle down beside us like a calm evening fire. Tonight, we're going to move slowly through a part of the world where temples rise from mountains, cities sleep beneath the sea, bridges cross warm, shallow waters, and strange carvings sit in stone like diagrams, whose full meaning may have faded from memory. Our journey is about the lost Hindu civilization some people believe may stand behind these great megastructures, not as a simple answer, and not as a claim we can place neatly under glass, but as a question that keeps returning whenever human hands and ancient stone meet, on a scale that feels almost too large for ordinary explanation. This is a story set across South Asia and beyond it, across India, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and the waters between land and legend. It touches places with very different histories, different cultures, and different religious meanings. Some are tied closely to Hindu tradition. Some were shaped by Buddhism, kingship, trade, empire, and local belief. Some were later reimagined through stories that travelled across centuries. But around all of them, there is the same slow human reaction. We stand in front of the stone, or look down into the water, or stare at the carved mountain, and we ask a very simple question. How did they do this? How did ancient builders cut a temple from a single mass of rock? How did they plan cities that later vanished under the sea? How did they align monuments with the sky, carve symbols that look like maps, and build sacred spaces with a precision that still makes modern visitors stop speaking for a moment? Were these achievements the work of patient human effort, careful planning, skilled hands, and generations of knowledge passed from teacher to student? Or do they point to something older and stranger, a lost civilization whose tools and ideas have not survived in the way we expect tools and ideas to survive? Before we go any further, I would love to know where you are listening from tonight. Are you somewhere close to these ancient places? Maybe in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Cambodia, or somewhere else in the wide world? Or are you far away, hearing about these stones from a quiet room, with the lights low and the day finally slowing down? And what time is it where you are right now? It is a fitting question for a journey like this, because these monuments were built by people who lived in another time, prayed in another time, worked in another time, and yet somehow left behind things that can still reach us in this one. If you find this kind of slow journey soothing, if you enjoy drifting through ancient mysteries with a calm mind and a little curiosity, then I would be grateful if you liked the video, subscribed, and stayed with us for the long road ahead. It helps this small corner of the world reach other people who enjoy history without hurry, science without shouting, and old mysteries without needing every question answered too quickly. And as always, I hope the story is interesting enough to keep your mind gently open, but not so loud that it keeps you from rest. So settle in, soften your thoughts, and let us begin with the stones themselves. There is something different about a megastructure. A small ruin invites us to imagine a house, a village, a person cooking, sleeping, repairing a wall, or walking through a doorway. But a megastructure does something else. It asks us to imagine organisation. It asks us to imagine thousands of decisions happening in the same direction. It asks us to picture workers, planners, rulers, priests, engineers, stonecutters, carriers, sculptors, and astronomers, all connected by a shared purpose strong enough to turn landscape into architecture. A megastructure is not just large. It is evidence of a society that could think beyond one lifetime. That is why these sites create such a strong feeling. Sigiriya rises above the forests of Sri Lanka, like a stone ship lifted from the jungle. Dwarka sits in tradition, as the city of Krishna, with underwater remains off the coast that have become tied to questions of memory, flood, and lost urban life. Kailasa Temple at Ellora appears almost impossible at first glance, because instead of being built upward stone by stone, it was carved downward into the rock, as if someone decided to reveal a temple already sleeping inside the mountain. Sakwala Chakraya, carved near an ancient monastic site in Sri Lanka, has been described by some as a star map, a cosmic diagram, or even something more unusual. Rama Setu, the chain of limestone shoals between India and Sri Lanka, sits at the meeting point of geology, epic tradition, devotion, and argument. And Angkor Wat, though far from India, carries the mark of Hindu cosmology in its original design, rising from Cambodia's flat land like a stone model of the sacred universe. Each site has a mainstream explanation. That matters. Archaeology, geology, art history, and engineering have all spent years studying these places. Human beings are often more capable than we give them credit for, especially when they work across generations. Ancient does not mean simple. Ancient does not mean primitive. A person who lived 1,000 or 2,000 years ago had the same human brain we do, the same ability to observe, measure, remember, teach, and improve. They did not need modern machines to be brilliant. Sometimes they needed patience, discipline, and a very strong reason to keep going. But this is also where the mystery begins, because even when we accept human genius, the scale can still unsettle us. The more closely we look, the more the simple picture becomes layered. We find ancient stories of flying vehicles called vimanas in Sanskrit literature. We find descriptions of gods travelling across the sky, of weapons with terrible force, of cities built with divine help, of bridges raised by armies, and palaces placed in the heavens. We find temple architecture based on cosmic diagrams, measurements linked to sacred geometry, and monuments arranged as if stone could become a map between earth and the sky. Most historians treat these as myth, theology, poetry, royal symbolism, or religious imagination. That is the careful way. But others ask whether some myths might preserve distorted memories of real technologies or lost knowledge, carried forward until the machines became gods, the engineers became divine beings, and the old world became a sacred story. It is an idea that must be handled carefully. It is easy to turn wonder into exaggeration. It is easy to look at a difficult building and say, ordinary humans could not have done this. But that can be unfair to the people who actually built it. The workers who cut stone, moved blocks, measured alignments, carved pillars, and planned sacred spaces were not background figures in someone else's legend. They were skilled people. They knew their materials. They understood weight, water, slope, heat, tool marks, and time. They may not have used the words we use today, but they knew engineering in the practical language of hands and stone. Still, there is another mistake we can make as well. We can become so confident in simple explanations that we stop feeling the size of the achievement. We can say, yes, they carved it, yes, they carried it, yes, they planned it, and then move on too quickly. But when you stand before a place like Kailasa Temple, with its courtyards, pillars, shrines, elephants, towers and walls all cut from one continuous rock mass, the explanation may be true and still feel incomplete, not because it requires aliens or anti-gravity, but because the human effort itself becomes almost unimaginable. Even a fully human explanation can be mysterious when the labour is that intense and the vision is that clear. The lost civilization idea grows in this space between respect and disbelief. It asks whether South Asia and its wider cultural world may have inherited memory from a much older phase of human development, a phase that built near coasts before seas rose, a phase that understood astronomy more deeply than expected, a phase that encoded knowledge into temples, myths and ritual diagrams, a phase that may not have left behind factories, wires or metal engines, but may have left behind something harder to classify, a pattern of construction and cosmology that later cultures preserve through sacred tradition. This is where the topic becomes especially interesting, because the word Hindu does not simply refer to one narrow thing. Hindu civilization is not a single city, a single empire, or a single date on a timeline. It is a long and complex world of rituals, languages, philosophies, deities, kingdoms, village traditions, temple networks, epics, sciences, calendars, and sacred landscapes. It includes the Vedas, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, temple architecture, astronomy, mathematics, pilgrimage routes, and ideas of cosmic time so vast they can make ordinary history feel like a candle next to the night sky. When people imagine a lost Hindu civilization behind ancient megastructures, they are often thinking of this larger world, a civilization where myth and measurement were not always separated in the modern way. In that worldview, a temple was not only a building, it could be a model of the cosmos. A mountain was not only a mountain, it could be Mount Meru, the sacred centre around which the universe was imagined to turn. A bridge was not only a crossing, it could be the trace of a divine campaign, a mark left by gods, heroes, animals, and kings. A city was not only a place to live, it could be a reflection of order, duty, power, and cosmic law. When such ideas are carved into stone, they can survive long after the people who understood every meaning have gone. That is why modern visitors sometimes feel as though they are looking at something coded. At Angkor Wat, the temple's layout has been interpreted through Hindu cosmology, with towers representing sacred mountains and moats suggesting cosmic oceans. At Ellora, Kailasa Temple does not merely show devotion to Shiva, it recreates a sacred mountain in solid rock, turning geology into theology through an act of almost unbelievable removal. At Dwarka, the line between text, faith, archaeology, and sea level, change becomes difficult to hold steady. At Rama Setu, satellite images and shallow waters give a visible shape to a story known by millions through the Ramayana. At Sigiriya, water gardens, frescoes, mirror walls, and a palace in the sky raise questions about royal power, artistic ambition, and the control of landscape. At Sakwala Chakraya, circles and symbols carved into stone invite interpretation, because they do not explain themselves. Some people look at these sites and see evidence of lost machines. They imagine ancient aircraft, energy portals, star maps, and visitors from beyond Earth. They point to Vimanas and ask whether ancient texts describe flying craft rather than symbolic chariots. They look at huge stonework and wonder whether some forgotten method reduced weight or softened rock. They study circular diagrams and ask whether they were meant for astronomy, ritual, navigation, or contact with other worlds. They even bring in stranger ideas, including reptilian beings, hidden races, or extraterrestrial teachers who may have appeared in the language of gods. These ideas are not accepted by mainstream archaeology, and many of them rest on speculation rather than evidence. But the reason they persist is worth understanding. People are not only trying to explain stone, they are trying to explain the feeling these places create, the sense that the past was not small, the sense that ancient people may have understood the world in ways we have forgotten, the sense that modern history, with its neat categories and museum labels, may not always capture the full emotional force of a site. When a mountain has been hollowed into a temple, when a sacred city is remembered beneath the sea, when a bridge appears between epic and geology, the imagination naturally begins to widen. There is also a deeper reason these mysteries are so powerful. They touch the question of loss. We live in a time that assumes progress moves in one direction, from simple to complex, from rough to refined, from ignorance to knowledge. But history does not always behave that neatly. Knowledge can be lost, cities can drown, libraries can burn, skilled traditions can vanish when the people who carry them are killed, displaced, or no longer needed. A technique that was ordinary in one century can become a puzzle in another. Even today, with all our machines, there are ancient methods of stone fitting, pigment making, metal working, water management, and astronomical observation that we still study with respect. Not because ancient people had lasers hidden in caves, but because skill itself can disappear when its chain of teaching is broken. So when we speak of a lost civilization, We do not have to imagine a world of chrome aircraft and glowing portals. A lost civilization can also mean a lost level of organisation, a lost school of builders, a lost way of reading the sky, a lost religious geography, a lost connection between mathematics and myth. It can mean that people once knew how to gather labour, faith, and technical skill into projects so demanding that we now struggle to imagine the social world that made them possible. And yet, the more unusual possibilities remain part of the atmosphere around these sites. Vimana's stargates anti-gravity, beings from the stars, serpent-shaped powers beneath the earth, gods who descend from the sky, and sacred weapons that sound strangely modern to some readers. These ideas belong to the outer edge of the discussion, where speculation becomes a kind of storytelling. We will not treat every mystery as proof of hidden technology. That would be too easy. But we will also not strip the stories of their power. Myths matter, even when they are not engineering manuals. They preserve fears, hopes, memories, and patterns of meaning. Sometimes they point to real places. Sometimes they carry fragments of old events. Sometimes they turn human achievements into divine drama because the achievement itself felt divine. This journey will move through that careful middle ground. We will look at the sacred landscape where myth and stone begin to overlap. We will climb towards Sigiriya and consider why a king would build a palace so high above the forest, and why later imagination could turn that height into something almost otherworldly. We will go down to the waters near Dwarka, where archaeology and devotion meet in the tide. We will stand before Kailasa Temple and think about what it means to carve a mountain from the top down. We will pause at Sakwala Chakraya and ask why a circular carving can invite such cosmic interpretations. We will cross, in thought, the shallow line of Rama Setu, where geology and epic memory sit side by side. We will travel to Angkor Wat, where Hindu cosmology became stone on a scale that still humbles the modern eye. And through all of it, we will return to the same quiet question. Were these places built by ordinary ancient humans using extraordinary skill, or do they preserve the memory of a civilization whose knowledge has slipped through the cracks of history? The safest answer may be that ancient humans were far more extraordinary than we often allow. But the most interesting answer may not be safe at all. It may sit somewhere between known tools and unknown methods, between devotion and design, between sacred imagination and practical engineering. It may require us to respect archaeology without flattening wonder, and to enjoy mystery without mistaking every shadow for evidence. Because the real story of these megastructures is not only about whether ancient builders had lost machines, it is about how human beings turn belief into stone. It is about how memory survives when written records fail. It's about how a landscape becomes sacred because people return to it, build on it, name it, and connect it to the heavens. It is about how a civilization can leave behind a monument so large that later generations no longer believe ordinary hands could have made it. That reaction itself is part of the mystery. When we say, "How could humans have done this?" we reveal something about our own age. We live surrounded by machines, and so we imagine machines behind every great task. But earlier builders had other powers. Time was one of them. Collective labour was another. Faith was another. A king's command, a priest's plan, a sculptor's eye, a mason's patience, a community's devotion. These are not small forces. Given enough years, enough hands, and enough reason, they can move mountains, or at least carve temples out of them. Still, even after saying all that, the stones remain. They do not become less strange because we choose a careful explanation. Sigiriya still rises from the jungle with its old stairways and painted figures. Dwarka still carries the pull of a city remembered in sacred tradition and searched for beneath the waves. Kailasa still looks as though it was released from the mountain by people who saw the finished form before the first stone fell away. Sakwala Chakraya still sits in rock, waiting for each new visitor to decide whether it is a diagram, a ritual object, a map, or a mystery. Rama Setu still stretches through pale water, like a line drawn between epic and earth. Angkor Wat still holds its towers against the sky, calm and enormous, built to reflect a universe of gods, oceans, mountains and kings. And maybe that is the best place to begin. Not with a claim, not with a verdict, not with proof of aliens or proof against wonder, but with the feeling of standing before these places and allowing them to be difficult, allowing them to resist quick explanation, allowing the past to be intelligent, strange, disciplined, symbolic, and sometimes deeply misunderstood. So as the night settles around us, let us begin by stepping into the sacred landscape itself, the world of rivers, mountains, oceans, temples, stars and stories, where South Asia's ancient builders did not separate stone from spirit as sharply as we do now. In that world, a carved wall could be a prayer, a city could be a cosmic plan, a bridge could be remembered as the work of heroes, and a mountain, if approached with enough devotion and enough skill, could become the body of a god waiting inside the rock. To understand why these ancient places feel so charged with mystery, we first have to step back from the monuments themselves and look at the world around them. Not just the stone, not just the dates, not just the measurements, but the landscape that gave them meaning. Because in much of ancient South Asia, a mountain was rarely just a mountain, a river was rarely just a river, and a temple was rarely just a building with a roof and a door. The land itself could become sacred. A bend in a river could become a place where heaven felt closer. A cave could become the mouth of another realm. A peak could become the seat of a god. A stretch of ocean could become a memory so old that later generations argued about whether it belonged to geology, history, or divine action. This is one of the first things that makes the lost civilization idea so powerful. The monuments were not dropped randomly into empty scenery. They were built into landscapes already full of story. A temple might be placed where a god was believed to have appeared. A city might be tied to a hero, a king, or an avatar. A bridge might be remembered as the path of an army crossing the sea. A carved diagram might not have been a decoration at all, but a way of organising the universe on stone. When modern visitors arrive with cameras and guidebooks, they often see a ruin. But for many people across centuries, these were not ruins. They were active places, living places, points of contact between the human world and something larger. This does not mean every story is a literal historical record. Ancient myths are not usually written like modern reports. They do not behave like engineering documents or government surveys. They work in a different way. They preserve memory through image, drama, exaggeration, devotion, and repetition. A battle becomes cosmic. A king becomes larger than life. A journey becomes a route between worlds. A technology, if one existed, might become a divine weapon. A strange natural formation might become the footprint of a god. This is why myth is difficult and valuable at the same time. If we treat it as pure fact, we may misunderstand it. If we dismiss it as pure fantasy, we may miss what it is carrying. In the Hindu world especially, time itself is not small. It is not only a straight line of years, one after another, like tidy boxes on a calendar. Hindu cosmology speaks in enormous cycles, ages of creation and decline, worlds rising and dissolving, gods appearing across vast stretches of time. This gives ancient places a different kind of depth. A temple is not only old because it may have stood for hundreds or thousands of years. It may also point towards stories imagined across cosmic ages, where human history and divine time overlap. So when people ask whether there was a lost civilization behind the great monuments, they're often responding to this sense of scale. The stones feel old, yes, but the stories around them feel even older. A modern archaeologist might begin with pottery, inscriptions, building phases, tool marks, carbon dating, settlement patterns, and historical sources. That is careful work, and without it, we would be left mostly with guesses. But a pilgrim, a priest, a storyteller, or a local villager might begin somewhere else. They might begin with a sacred name, a ritual memory, a festival, a song, or a route walked by generations before them. These two ways of knowing do not always fit together neatly. One looks for material evidence, the other looks for meaning that survives through practice. The interesting thing is not choosing one and throwing away the other. The interesting thing is watching what happens when they meet. In that meeting place, myth and stone begin to overlap. A place like Dwarka is a clear example. To many devotees, Dwarka is not simply an ancient city on the coast. It is connected with Krishna, one of the most beloved figures in Hindu tradition. The stories say his city was magnificent, wealthy, planned, protected, and eventually swallowed by the sea. When underwater remains were later explored off the coast, the imagination naturally stirred. Was this the city of the epic tradition? Was it evidence that the stories preserved a real memory of a coastal settlement lost to changing seas? Or were people connecting separate things because the story was already powerful? The answer depends on who is asking and what kind of evidence they are willing to accept. But the emotional force of the question is easy to understand. A city remembered in scripture, a sea that hides stone, and a coastline where history and devotion both stand looking toward the water. That is exactly the kind of place where mystery grows. The same happens with Rama Setu, the chain of shoals between India and Sri Lanka. Geologists can discuss sandbanks, coral, limestone, sea levels, currents, and natural formation. Devotees can speak of the bridge built in the Ramayana by Rama's army to reach Lanka. Satellite images can show the pale line beneath the shallow sea. None of these views cancel the others in the minds of many people. For science, it may be a natural formation shaped by coastal processes. For faith, it may be a sacred trace. For mystery seekers, it becomes a possible sign of ancient engineering, maybe even something far beyond what we expect from the deep past. The same shape can hold several meanings at once, and that is what makes it so difficult to reduce to one sentence. This is important because ancient builders often chose their sites with care. They were not only looking for flat land, they looked for symbolic land. They cared about direction, water, elevation, horizon lines, and the relationship between earth and sky. Many temples were aligned to the cardinal directions. Many sacred spaces were planned through geometric diagrams, sometimes based on the mandala, a structured pattern that could represent cosmic order. In temple architecture, the central shrine was not simply a room. It could represent the deepest point of sacred presence. The tower above it could suggest a mountain. The surrounding walls, gateways, courtyards, and water features could create a model of the universe that a person could physically walk through. It was architecture as experience, not just something to look at, but something to move through with the body, the senses, and the mind. This is one reason some people mistake ancient sacred design for hidden technology. And perhaps mistake is not always the right word. Sometimes the boundary is simply unclear. A temple designed as a cosmic diagram may not be technology in the modern mechanical sense, but it is still a system. It organizes movement. It controls sight lines. It uses sound, shadow, scale, ritual, and repetition. It can make a person feel small, focused, humbled, or lifted. It can track the sun at certain times of year. It can connect a king to a deity, a city to a cosmic order, or a community to a shared rhythm of festivals and seasons. If technology means a tool for changing human experience, then ancient sacred architecture was certainly a kind of technology. It may not have used engines, but it used stone, light, space, and belief with great precision. That may sound simple, but it changes how we look at the evidence. When someone says, "This temple was aligned with the sky," we do not have to leap immediately to aliens, stargates, or anti-gravity. Ancient people watched the sky constantly. They needed it for calendars, agriculture, navigation, ritual timing, and royal legitimacy. The sun, moon, planets, and stars were not background decoration. They were part of the working structure of life. A society that watched the sky for centuries could become very good at noticing patterns. It could build those patterns into stone. It could attach those patterns to gods and myths. And after enough time passed, later generations might look back and wonder whether the builders had access to knowledge from somewhere beyond ordinary human life. The idea of vimanas adds another layer. In Sanskrit literature, vimanas can refer to palaces, chariots, or flying vehicles, depending on the text and context. In some later interpretations, they become ancient aircraft, sometimes imagined with engines, weapons, and advanced flight systems. Mainstream scholars generally treat these descriptions as mythological, symbolic, poetic, or part of epic storytelling. But for those interested in lost technology, vimanas are irresistible. The thought is simple. What if ancient texts were describing real machines in the only language available at the time? What if divine chariots in the sky were not entirely metaphorical? What if stories of gods travelling through the air preserve a distorted memory of a more advanced age? There is no solid archaeological evidence for ancient aircraft in South Asia. No engines have been found, no metal airframes, no runways, no workshops that would support such a technology. That matters. A civilization capable of mechanical flight would usually leave behind a wide chain of evidence. But the absence of such evidence does not stop the imagination, because the texts are vivid and the monuments are impressive, and the human mind enjoys connecting bright points into a pattern. Sometimes the pattern is real, sometimes it is invented. Often it is a mixture of observation, desire, and mystery, like looking at stars and seeing a figure in the sky. The stars are real, the figure is ours. Then there are the serpent beings, the Nagas, found across South Asian religious and mythological traditions. Nagas are associated with water, underground realms, fertility, protection, and hidden treasure. In some stories, they are powerful semi-divine beings. In modern fringe theories, they are sometimes reinterpreted as reptilian entities, perhaps linked to underground civilizations or non-human intelligence. This is a dramatic leap from the traditional material, but it shows how old symbols can be pulled into new mysteries. A serpent deity becomes a reptilian being. A celestial palace becomes a spacecraft. A sacred diagram becomes a star map. A natural bridge becomes an ancient engineered causeway. The old world is translated into the language of modern speculation. That translation can be exciting, but it can also flatten the original traditions. Nagas did not need to be extraterrestrials to matter. Vimanas did not need to be airplanes to carry meaning. A cosmic diagram did not need to be a literal portal to shape human experience. In many cases, the symbolic meaning is already rich enough. But it is also true that myth sometimes clings to places for reasons that are not obvious. Why does one hill become sacred and not another? Why does one cave become feared? Why does one stretch of water gather stories for centuries? There may be old events behind some of these memories: earthquakes, floods, migrations, battles, lost settlements, unusual natural phenomena, or impressive works of engineering whose practical purpose was later forgotten. Flood memory is especially important. Coastlines change, seas rise and fall, rivers shift their courses. Ports that once served busy trade can sink, silt up, or move inland. A city near the water can become a ruin beneath the waves, not in a single dramatic night, but through generations of erosion, storm, subsidence, and sea level change. To people who live through such changes, the loss can become a story. Over time, the story may become sacred. The city was not just flooded, it was taken, it was withdrawn, it returned to the sea. The divine world claimed it back. This is how environmental memory can become myth, and myth can preserve the emotional truth of a disaster long after the exact details are gone. South Asia is full of landscapes where water matters. The Indus, the Ganges, the Yamuna, the Saraswati of tradition, the Narmada, the Godavari, the Krishna, the Kaveri, and many other rivers have shaped settlement, farming, trade, pilgrimage, and imagination. Rivers are not only resources in this world. They are mothers, goddesses, paths of purification and lines of memory. The loss or movement of a river can change a civilization. The drying of channels, the shifting of monsoons, and the rise and fall of coastal zones can reshape where people live and what they remember. A lost civilization does not have to vanish through a single catastrophe. It can fade through water moving away, water rising too high, crops failing, trade routes changing, and sacred centres losing the practical conditions that once sustained them. This is where archaeology becomes quieter but more powerful. It does not always find a dramatic machine or a hidden chamber. Sometimes it finds settlement layers, beads, pottery, drainage systems, foundations, quarries, inscriptions, and food remains. These may sound less thrilling than a Stargate, but they are the real fingerprints of human life. They show how people ate, traded, built, worshipped, repaired, and adapted. They show that ancient societies were not static. They changed constantly. They borrowed ideas. They reused older sites. They built on top of earlier structures. They turned old sacred places into new ones. A temple might contain memory from a shrine that stood before it, which may itself have replaced an older sacred spot marked only by a tree, a spring, or a stone. So when we ask whether a lost Hindu civilization stands behind these megastructures, the answer may not be one hidden empire with one capital and one set of secret machines. It may be a long inheritance. Knowledge passing through many hands, many languages, many kingdoms, many priestly schools, and many building traditions. Some of that knowledge was written down, some was memorized, some was encoded in ritual. Some lived in the trained eye of a master builder who knew how to place a foundation, choose a stone, and align a shrine without needing to explain every step in a text that would survive for us. When that living chain breaks, later people may call the result impossible. The word impossible comes up often with ancient sites, impossible blocks, impossible carvings, impossible alignments, impossible precision. It is a tempting word because it creates instant drama, but often what we really mean is not impossible. We mean difficult to imagine, difficult to reconstruct, difficult to prove in detail, difficult to accept from people who did not have modern machines. There is a difference. Ancient builders had levers, ropes, sledges, ramps, chisels, hammers, abrasives, pulleys in some contexts, scaffolding, water management, measuring cords, geometry, labour organisation, and time. More importantly, they had social systems capable of directing people toward a shared goal. If a ruler, religious institution, or community believed a monument mattered enough, they could invest generations in it. Still, even after we correct the word impossible, the sense of awe remains. Kailasa Temple did require a staggering removal of rock. Angkor Wat did require enormous planning and labour. Sigiriya did require water systems, gardens, stairways and construction in a very difficult setting. The underwater remains near Dwarka do raise questions about ancient settlement and coastal change. Rama Setu does continue to sit in the imagination because its physical presence resembles the memory of a crossing. Sakwala Chakraya does remain visually unusual enough to invite interpretation. The sites do not become ordinary simply because humans built them. In some ways, they become more remarkable. One of the most interesting things about sacred landscapes is that they are designed to make memory durable. A story told once can disappear. A story carved into stone can last longer. A story attached to a pilgrimage can be repeated every year. A story tied to a festival can cross centuries. A story built into architecture can be entered by people who never read the original text. This is how a civilization speaks after its libraries are gone. It puts meaning into roots, rituals, orientations, images, and names. The landscape becomes an archive, not an archive with labels and shelves, but an archive walked by feet, sung by voices, and repaired by hands. That kind of archive is difficult for modern people because we like our information separated. History in one book, religion in another, engineering in another, astronomy in another. ancient sacred builders did not always divide the world that way. The same structure could serve political power, ritual worship, cosmic symbolism, water control, calendar keeping, artistic display, and social unity. A modern visitor may ask, what was this for? The ancient answer may have been, yes, it was for many things at once. It marked the king's power, it honoured the god, it followed the sky, it gathered the community, it transformed the landscape, it reminded people of a story, it made the invisible order visible. This is why the lost civilization question keeps pulling us back. Perhaps what was lost was not a machine, but a way of seeing connections. The connection between the body and the temple, between the temple and the mountain, between the mountain and the cosmos, between the city and the sacred map, between the river and the goddess, between the sea and the memory of a vanished place. We can still study each part, but the whole system is harder to recover. It was not only knowledge in the head, it was knowledge in practice, knowledge in movement, knowledge in the way people approached a site, removed their sandals, circled a shrine, watched the dawn, listened to chanting, touched stone worn smooth by other hands, and felt themselves placed inside a larger order. Of course, this does not prove that forgotten aircraft once crossed the sky, or that stargates opened in temple courtyards, or that anti-gravity moved megaliths into place, but it does explain why such ideas attach themselves to these places. The monuments already feel like bridges between worlds. They were designed to feel that way. A temple tower reaching upward, a cave leading inward, a sacred bridge crossing water, a city remembered beneath the sea, a carved diagram filled with circles, all of these invite the mind to travel beyond the everyday. In that sense, the Stargate idea may be a modern myth placed on top of an older myth. Not a physical gate, perhaps, but a sign that people still feel these places as thresholds, and thresholds are important in Hindu sacred geography. A tirtha, often translated as a crossing place or ford, can mean a sacred place where one crosses from ordinary life toward purification or contact with the divine. Rivers, temple sites, pilgrimage centres, and holy landscapes can function as crossings. This idea is quieter than a glowing science fiction portal, but in human terms, it may be more powerful. A person arrives carrying grief, hope, illness, guilt, devotion, or curiosity. They bathe, pray, walk, offer, listen, and leave changed in some small way. The place has moved them from one state to another. That is a kind of passage. It does not need machinery to be real. When we look at the sites ahead of us, we should keep this in mind. The builders may have been engineers, but they were not only engineers. They may have been artists, but not only artists. They may have been servants of kings, but not only that. They worked inside worlds of meaning that made stone worth cutting, hauling, carving and polishing for years beyond the needs of ordinary shelter. No one carves a mountain temple by accident. No one designs a huge sacred complex without a reason strong enough to outlive fatigue. No one attaches a bridge, a city or a fortress to divine memory unless the place already carries an unusual weight. So we begin not with machines, but with meaning. We begin with the idea that ancient South Asia and its connected cultural world were full of sacred geography, where memory and landscape reinforced each other. This does not weaken the mystery, it deepens it. Because if the stones were built not only to impress the eye, but to hold a model of the universe, then every measurement, direction, and carving may have carried more than one purpose. A wall could be structural and symbolic. A stairway could move the body and prepare the mind. A water garden could cool the air and echo cosmic waters. A high rock could protect a king and lift him into the realm of gods. And with that thought, the road begins to rise toward one of the strangest and most dramatic places in the region, a massive column of stone standing above the Sri Lankan jungle. It is not a Hindu temple in the simple sense, and its history belongs to a particular island kingdom, with its own Buddhist, royal and cultural setting. But it has become part of the wider mystery because it feels like a place built between earth and sky, a fortress, a palace, a statement of power, and perhaps, to some eyes, the remnant of something even older. To reach it, we have to leave the flat world below, follow the gardens and old water channels, and look upward towards Sigiriya, where a king once placed his dream on the back of a lion-shaped rock. The first sight of Sigiriya does not feel like a normal ruin. It does not appear slowly the way a broken wall or a buried foundation appears as you walk closer. It rises all at once from the flatness of the land, a huge mass of stone standing above the forest, as if the earth had pushed one finger upward and then forgotten to lower it again. Around it the jungle spreads in every direction, green, humid, restless, full of birds, insects, and leaves that shine after rain. But the rock remains still. It has the calm of something that has watched kings arrive, monks chant, armies pass, tourists climb, and centuries fall away like dry bark. To call it a fortress is correct, but it is not enough. To call it a palace is also correct, but still not enough. Sigiriya was a royal citadel, a designed landscape, a high place of power, and one of the most dramatic acts of ancient building in Sri Lanka. It was shaped in the 5th century by King Kailasa, a ruler whose story is tangled with ambition, fear, betrayal, and the deep human desire to turn stone into a statement. The main rock rises about 180 metres above the surrounding plain, which is high enough to make the climb feel real in your legs, but not so high that it vanishes into mountain distance. It is close, visible, commanding. It does not hide, it waits. And perhaps that is why people have looked at Sigiriya and wondered whether it belongs only to the known history of kings and kingdoms, or whether it preserves something older, stranger, and harder to name. It is not usually described as a Hindu monument in the strict sense. Its most accepted history is tied to Sri Lankan kingship, Buddhist monastic use, and the political world of ancient Lanka. But in the wider mystery of South Asian megastructures, Sigiriya often appears like a stone question mark above the jungle. It has height, geometry, water engineering, painted figures, mirror-polished walls, lion-shaped gateways, and the remains of a palace placed where few people would casually decide to build a palace unless they had either great confidence, great fear, or a very dramatic architect. The story most often told begins with King Kassapa. He seized the throne from his father, King Datusena, and ruled from this rock fortress after moving his capital away from Anuradhapura. The reasons are usually explained through politics and fear. A ruler who takes power violently may look at the world differently from one who inherits it peacefully. A palace on a rock is not only beautiful, it is defensible. It is a place from which the land can be watched. It is a place difficult to attack. It is also a place that announces distance between the king and everyone else. Down below are roads, fields, forests, workers, soldiers, and ordinary human uncertainty. Up above is the ruler, lifted into the sky, almost close enough to borrow authority from the heavens. But Sigiriya is more than a refuge. If Kassapa had wanted only safety, he could have built walls and kept his designs plain. Instead, the site became a carefully planned world. The approach from the west leads through gardens arranged with an order that is still visible after all these centuries. There are water gardens, terraced gardens, boulder gardens, paths, pools, channels, and old fountains that depend on pressure and gravity rather than modern machinery. During the rains, parts of the system can still come alive, which is one of those details that makes the past feel suddenly near. A stone channel that still guides water after 1500 years is not just an archaeological feature. It is a quiet reply from the builders saying, "Yes, we understood our world very well. Water is important here." Sigiriya stands in a dry zone landscape where controlling water meant controlling life. Ancient Sri Lanka had a deep tradition of reservoirs, irrigation tanks, canals, and water management. To build gardens at Sigiriya was not just to decorate a royal residence, it was to display command over nature. Water flowed where the king wanted it to flow. Pools reflected the sky. Fountains rose from hidden pressure. The hot land was cooled and ordered. The visitor walking toward the rock did not simply see a fortress. They moved through a designed experience, a slow approach from water and garden toward height and stone. It was beauty used as power, and power softened just enough to become beauty. This is where the imagination begins to work. The water gardens look planned with such care that some people have asked whether they preserve knowledge far beyond ordinary ancient engineering. The channels, symmetry, and pressure systems can feel almost too elegant for a world we sometimes lazily imagine as primitive. But that laziness is the problem. Ancient Sri Lankan engineers were not primitive. They lived in a region where water management was essential, where kings built vast irrigation works, and where practical intelligence could be refined over generations. The mystery is not that they somehow cheated nature. The mystery is that they knew nature so well that they could make it appear obedient. Still, it is understandable that visitors sense something unusual. At Sigiriya, engineering is not hidden in a back room. It is part of the entrance. You pass through it before you climb. You walk through channels and pools before you reach the stairways. It is as if the site is teaching you how to read it. First water, then stone. First order, then height. First the world below, then the world above. The climb changes the body. This matters because ancient sites are not only seen, they are felt. Your breathing changes, your feet become careful. The rock face rises beside you, warm in the sun. The jungle drops lower, birds cross open air. The sound of the ground begins to fade. Step by step, Sigiriya turns from landscape into ascent. And halfway up, the visitor encounters one of its most famous wonders. The paintings on the western face of the rock. The frescoes are set high above the ground in a sheltered recess. They show beautiful female figures, often described as celestial maidens, court ladies, apsaras, or divine attendants, though their exact meaning remains debated. They appear from the painted surface with bare upper bodies, elaborate jewellery, graceful hands, flowers, and expressions that seem calm, distant, and almost aware of being watched across time. Once, there may have been many more of them. Today only a smaller number survive, but even those remaining figures give the rock a strange softness. After so much stone, heat, and height, suddenly there is colour, human form, ornament, a glimpse of a world that cared about beauty even in a place built for power. Some people see in these figures evidence of courtly luxury. Others see religious imagery. Others see cloud maidens or beings of the sky. The uncertainty is part of their pull. They seem to float against the rock, not standing on ground, not placed inside a normal room, but suspended in a space between palace and heaven. If Sigiriya was meant to make the king appear elevated beyond ordinary life, then these painted women may have helped create that atmosphere. A visitor climbing toward the summit would pass these radiant figures as if moving through a celestial layer. It would not be difficult to feel that the rock itself was becoming less earthly. This is one reason Sigiriya easily attracts more unusual interpretations. Where the known evidence speaks of a royal citadel, the experience whispers of a sky palace. And once that phrase enters the mind, it begins to connect with wider South Asian ideas. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, palaces in the heavens, divine beings, flying chariots, and mountain realms appear again and again. The sacred mountain is a common image. Mount Meru, the cosmic centre, stands in the imagination as an axis between worlds. Kings often borrowed this symbolism. They did not simply rule land. They positioned themselves within cosmic order. A palace on a high rock can become more than a palace. It can become a statement that the ruler stands between earth and sky. Was Sigiriya designed with that larger cosmic symbolism in mind? We should be careful. The direct historical setting is specific, and it belongs to Sri Lanka's own cultural world. But ancient kings did not build in a vacuum. Ideas travelled across the Indian Ocean. Religious imagery moved between India, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. Concepts of sacred kingship, divine mountains, celestial women, and cosmic landscapes were widely understood in different forms. So even if Sigiriya is not a Hindu monument in the simple way Angkor Wat began as one, it still belongs to a broader world where stone, kingship, and sacred imagination often overlapped. After the frescoes comes the mirror wall. Today it is no longer mirror bright in the way its name suggests, but it was once polished to a high sheen, so smooth that it may have reflected the figures, the light, and perhaps the visitor passing beside it. Later visitors wrote graffiti and poems on it, leaving behind small human responses to the beauty of the site. This is one of the loveliest details at Sigiriya, because it reminds us that the monument did not become silent after the king was gone. People kept coming. They looked, reacted, admired, joked, longed, and wrote. A great site gathers not only the intentions of its builders, but the emotions of everyone who comes after. A polished wall on a high rock feels almost theatrical. Imagine approaching it centuries ago when the surface was newer, brighter, and more reflective. You have climbed above the gardens. The forest stretches below. Painted women appear from the rock face. The wall beside you catches light. Your own figure passes through it, blurred and shining. For a moment, the site does something subtle. It makes you aware of yourself inside the design. You're not simply observing Sigiriya. Sigiriya is observing you back, or at least returning your image through a wall of polished plaster. That is not a machine. It is not a Stargate. It is not alien technology. But it is a form of ancient psychological design, and it is very effective. Then come the lion paws. At one stage, the entrance to the upper palace passed through the form of a huge lion. Today, the enormous paws remain at the base of the final stairway, carved in stone, resting on either side like the last surviving parts of a vanished guardian. The full lion head and body are gone, but the paws alone are enough to change the feeling of the climb. You're no longer just ascending stairs. You're entering through an animal, through a symbol of power, kingship, danger, and protection. The name Sigiriya itself is often connected with the Lion Rock. A lion at the gateway would have made the summit feel like a place reached through controlled fear. This is another threshold. Ancient builders loved thresholds because thresholds prepare the mind. A gate tells you that you are leaving one kind of space and entering another. A lion gate does this with force. It says the world above is not ordinary. To reach it, you pass between claws. You climb into the body of royal power. It is hard to imagine a more direct message from a king who wanted his authority to be felt in the muscles of every visitor. At the top, the summit opens into the remains of walls, foundations, pools, and platforms. Much is gone, of course. The timber, roofing, fabrics, furniture, and daily life have disappeared. What remains is the stone outline of an astonishing decision. A palace was built here, on this high, exposed surface, above the jungle, above the gardens, above the ordinary world. From the summit, the view is wide and commanding. You can see why a ruler would want it. You can also feel the loneliness of it. Power at that height must have come with a certain silence. One of the strange things about Sigiriya is that it feels both defensive and dreamlike. A fortress usually suggests hardness, suspicion, and military purpose. A pleasure palace suggests comfort, beauty, and display. Sigiriya is both. It protects and performs. It withdraws from danger and invites admiration. It says, "No one can easily reach me," and also, "Look what I have made." That combination gives the site its unusual emotional charge. It was not just a hiding place. It was a royal world built in the air. When people search for evidence of a lost advanced civilization, they often focus on the hardest physical questions. How are materials moved? How are surfaces finished? How are water systems made? But sometimes the more interesting question is social. What kind of society can create something like this so quickly and so completely? Kassapa ruled for less than 2 decades. Sigiriya's main royal phase was brief, yet the planning, labour and artistry involved were enormous. That tells us that the knowledge did not begin with him. He may have commanded the project, but the skills behind it belong to wider traditions already present in the island. Builders, engineers, painters, gardeners, planners and labourers did not appear from nowhere. Sigiriya was the result of accumulated knowledge brought together by royal will. This is where the idea of hidden or older inheritance becomes more reasonable if we keep it grounded. Not hidden in the sense of aircraft buried under the rock, but hidden in the sense that we do not fully see the living traditions behind the finished monument. We see the palace. We do not see the training of the stoneworkers. We see the water garden. We do not see the generations of irrigation knowledge that made it possible. We see the frescoes. We do not see the workshops, pigments, scaffolding, apprentices and artistic conventions that produced them. A monument is the visible peak of a much larger mountain of skill. Most of that mountain has vanished. And once the visible remains are separated from the vanished knowledge that made them, mystery rushes in to fill the gap. Perhaps ancient anti-gravity lifted materials up the rock. Perhaps a lost race built the water systems. Perhaps beings from the sky taught the design. Perhaps the frescoes show not court women but celestial visitors. Perhaps the Lion Gateway was not symbolic but a guardian of some energy centre. These ideas are not supported by the known evidence, but they grow because the site feels too rich for a plain explanation. It seems to ask for a story as large as itself. The older stories of Sri Lanka add their own atmosphere. The island has long been a place where Buddhist history, Hindu tradition, local deities, yakshas, nagas, kings, monks, and epic memory overlap. In the Ramayana, Lanka becomes the kingdom of Ravana, a powerful and complex figure often imagined with extraordinary knowledge, flying vehicles, and a magnificent city. Some modern mystery writers connect Sigiriya to Ravana, suggesting that it may preserve traces of a much older aerial civilization or sky palace tradition. Mainstream history does not support this identification, and the known Sigiriya palace belongs to the period of Kasapa. But the connection survives in imagination, because the site looks like the kind of place a legendary Sky King might choose. A palace above the jungle does not have to work hard to attract myths of flight. Ravana's Vimana, often called the Pushpaka Vimana in later retellings, is one of those images that keeps returning in ancient technology theories. A flying vehicle, a sky chariot, a divine machine, moving between cities and realms. For many scholars, it belongs to the world of epic imagination. For others, it suggests a memory of lost flight. At Sigiriya, the association is more symbolic than historical, but it is easy to understand. Stand on the summit and watch the land spread below, and the idea of flight comes naturally. The rock itself feels like it has already lifted you halfway into the sky. That may be the real source of the Sky Fortress feeling. Sigiriya does not need engines to make flight imaginable. It makes the body climb until the world below looks distant. It places painted beings in the air. It reflects light from a polished wall. It brings water into a dry landscape and then lifts the ruler above it. It uses the lion, the garden, the stairway, the cliff, and the summit to create an experience of ascent. Ancient architecture often worked like this. It did not merely house power, it staged it. It made power visible, walkable, breathable, and unforgettable. There is a lesson here for how we approach other mysteries. When a site seems impossible, we should ask not only what tools were used, but what experience was intended. Sigiriya was meant to impress. It was meant to transform the visitor's sense of the king, the landscape, and perhaps the relationship between earth and sky. Its design was not accidental. Its drama was part of the function. In that sense, the wonder we feel now may not be so different from the wonder ancient visitors were supposed to feel. The site is still doing its job. After Kasapa's fall, the royal dream ended. The story says he was defeated, and the capital returned to Anuradhapura. Sigiriya later became associated again with monastic life. The palace in the sky did not continue as a royal capital for long. This brief life makes the site even more haunting. So much effort, so much planning, so much beauty, and then the political reason for it collapsed. The rock remained. The gardens remained in altered form. The paintings endured. The mirror wall gathered poems. The lion paws kept their silent watch. The king passed into history, but the stage he built outlived the drama. This is often the fate of megastructures. They begin as answers to very specific needs. A ruler wants legitimacy. A kingdom needs a capital. A priesthood needs a temple. A society needs a sacred centre. Then time removes the original need, and the structure becomes a question instead. Why here? Why so large? Why this shape? Why this much effort? The builders knew, or thought they knew. Later generations inherit the stone, but not always the certainty. At Sigiriya, the question is sharpened by isolation. It is not buried inside a modern city. It stands apart, visible from far away, surrounded by a landscape that still lets the imagination breathe. When mist gathers around the base, the rock seems to float. When the sun strikes its face, it turns warm and severe. When seen from nearby Pidurangala, or from the plains below, it has the presence of a natural monument transformed into human intention. That combination, nature first, then architecture, is central to its power. The builders did not create the rock, they recognized it. Then they turned it into a world. Perhaps that is what lost civilizations, real or imagined, always begin with. Recognition. The ability to see that a place is not ordinary. To look at a cliff, a mountain, a river mouth, a line of shoals, or a coastal island and sense that something can be made there, something that will bind people to the land through story and labour. The genius is not only in cutting the stone, it is in choosing the stone. It is in understanding how a natural form can be converted into authority, memory and myth. So was Sigiriya built by ordinary ancient humans? Yes, if ordinary means human rather than supernatural. But no, if ordinary means simple, careless or limited. The people behind Sigiriya were extraordinary in their planning, their water engineering, their artistic vision, and their ability to make a landscape speak. They did not need anti-gravity to make the rock feel airborne. They did not need extraterrestrial visitors to create a palace that seems to belong between worlds. They used the oldest tools of civilization: observation, organization, labor, story, fear, ambition, beauty, and time. Yet the mystery does not disappear. It simply changes shape. Instead of asking whether aliens built Sigiriya, we might ask how human beings became capable of imagining such places at all. What was happening in the mind of a king who chose a rock for a capital? What did the painters believe they were placing on that cliff face? What did visitors feel when they saw themselves reflected in the mirror wall? What older traditions of water, stone, garden, and sacred height came together here? How much knowledge vanished with the workers who knew how to build it? These questions are quieter than claims of ancient aircraft, but they last longer. They allow Sigiriya to remain what it truly is, a human creation so bold that it almost becomes myth by its own weight. The sky fortress above the jungle does not prove a lost technological empire, but it does prove that the ancient world could think in ways that still surprise us. It proves that power could be carved into a natural giant and made graceful. It proves that water could be guided, stone could be painted, cliffs could be climbed, and a palace could rise where the horizon itself became part of the architecture. As we leave Sigiriya in thought, descending from the summit back through the lion paws, past the old wall, past the painted figures, down toward the gardens where water once moved through hidden channels, the mystery begins to shift from height to depth. The next place does not rise above the jungle, it sinks beneath the sea. It is not remembered mainly as a king's fortress, but as a sacred city connected with Krishna, a city said to have glittered beside the ocean before the waves took it back. And there, in the waters near Dwarka, the question of a lost civilization changes again, because stone under the sea carries a different kind of silence. After the height of Sigiriya, the mind has to change direction. There, the mystery stood above the jungle, raised on a rock where a king could look down over the land. Here, the mystery lies beneath the water, where light breaks into fragments, sand moves with the current, and stone becomes harder to read. Dwarka does not begin with a climb. It begins with a shoreline, it begins with wind coming off the Arabian Sea, with temple bells in the modern town, with pilgrims walking toward Krishna's sacred city, and with the strange feeling that the place is not only beside the sea, but somehow still in conversation with it. Dwarka is one of those names that carries more than geography. To millions of people, it is not simply a coastal city in Gujarat. It is Krishna's city, the place where he is believed to have ruled after leaving Mathura, a city of gates, palaces, wealth, order, and divine presence. In the stories, Dwarka is not modest. It is magnificent. It belongs to a world where kings speak with gods, where heroes move across vast distances, where the sea itself can become part of destiny. And then, after Krishna's departure from the world, the city is said to have been swallowed by the ocean. That image is powerful enough by itself. A sacred city, once shining on the coast, taken back by the waves. It is the kind of story that does not need much help from imagination. It already has everything a mystery needs. But Dwarka is not just a story. That is where things become interesting. Along the coast and offshore, archaeologists and marine researchers have found remains that point to ancient settlement and maritime activity. Stone anchors, submerged structural remains, and evidence connected with old ports have made Dwarka one of the most discussed underwater archaeology sites in India. These findings do not prove every detail of the epic tradition in a simple, direct way. They do not place a neat label on the seabed saying, "Here is Krishna's palace, please swim carefully." The sea is not that generous, but they do show that the region has a deep history, that people lived, traded, built, sailed and anchored vessels along these waters long before the modern town became a place of pilgrimage. And this is where myth and stone begin to lean toward each other. Not merge completely, not become the same thing, but lean. The old texts speak of a city by the sea. The coast has archaeological depth. The seabed has yielded objects linked to maritime life. The modern sacred town continues to draw devotion. The result is a place where faith, archaeology, geology and speculation all stand together on the same shore, each looking out at the water and seeing something slightly different. For a pilgrim, Dwarka may be a tirtha, a crossing place, not only between land and sea, but between ordinary life and the presence of the divine. For an archaeologist, it may be a coastal settlement zone shaped by trade, erosion, changing sea levels, and long occupation. For a mystery seeker, it may be the visible edge of a drowned civilization, perhaps one that understood engineering, navigation, or cosmic knowledge far better than mainstream history allows. For a geologist, it may be a reminder that coastlines are never still, even when maps pretend they are. The sea moves. Rivers bring sediment, storms tear at the edge of land, harbours shift, islands change shape. A city can be safe for centuries and then slowly become vulnerable, not in one dramatic night, but through the patient work of water. That patience is easy to underestimate. We like sudden stories. The city sank in a single day. The gods withdrew their protection. The ocean rose like a wall and covered everything. These images are memorable, but real landscapes often change more slowly. A wall collapses after repeated storms, a harbour silts, a shoreline erodes, a settlement moves. People repair, abandon, rebuild, and remember. Then, after enough generations, the memory becomes sharper than the details. What was once a sequence of coastal changes becomes a single powerful story. The sea took the city. That does not make the story false in the human sense. It may preserve the emotional truth of loss. When a place is swallowed by water, whether suddenly or slowly, people do not remember it as a minor adjustment in shoreline morphology. They remember grief, danger, divine warning, exile, and awe. The language of myth can hold those feelings better than a technical report. And perhaps that is why Dwarka continues to feel so alive. It sits at the edge of two kinds of truth, the kind that can be measured and the kind that can be remembered. The underwater world adds another layer because the sea changes how evidence behaves. On land, a wall may stay where it falls. A foundation may remain buried under soil. A broken pot may lie in a layer that can be studied carefully. Underwater, everything is more complicated. Currents scatter objects. Sand covers and uncovers surfaces. Marine life grows over stone. Visibility changes from day to day. A diver may see a shape clearly in one moment and lose it in the next cloud of silt. The sea does not preserve history like a library. It preserves it like a dream, with parts missing and other parts strangely vivid. This is why underwater archaeology feels so different from excavation on land. It requires equipment, patience, trained divers, careful recording, and a willingness to work in a place where the environment itself is always moving. A stone anchor lying under the water is not dramatic in the way a golden statue would be dramatic. But it is important. An anchor means boats. Boats mean movement, trade, fishing, contact, arrival, departure, goods, people, and routes across the sea. One anchor is an object. Many anchors can suggest a maritime world. They remind us that the coast of Gujarat was not an isolated edge. It was a doorway. The name Dwarka itself is often connected with the idea of a gate or gateway. That meaning fits almost too well. A city at the edge of the sea is a gate between land and water. A sacred city is a gate between human and divine. A port is a gate between cultures. A mythic city swallowed by the ocean is a gate between history and memory. No wonder the place invites so many interpretations. It already stands at a threshold. In the wider story of a lost Hindu civilization, Dwarka becomes one of the most tempting pieces of evidence because it seems to offer something that many ancient mysteries do not. It offers a link between text and place. The stories say there was a city. The modern place carries the name. The archaeology points to ancient activity. The sea contains remains. That combination is powerful. It does not prove a fully preserved epic city lying intact beneath the waves, but it is enough to make the question feel serious. What if the stories remember a real coastal urban world? What if the sinking of Dwarka is not only symbolic, but rooted in the experience of settlement loss? What if the sacred memory preserved something that archaeology is only beginning to approach? Then come the more extraordinary ideas. Some researchers outside the mainstream have claimed that Dwarka may be far older than accepted history allows. Some connect it to a civilization before known recorded phases of Indian history, a maritime culture with advanced planning, perhaps even knowledge passed down from an age lost to flood. Others go further, linking Krishna's city to ancient technology, celestial beings, or a network of sacred sites arranged according to forgotten science. In these versions, Dwarka becomes something like an Indian Atlantis, not just a drowned city, but the remnant of a world whose knowledge was erased by catastrophe. The comparison is easy to understand, but it should be handled gently. Atlantis, Dwarka, and other drowned city traditions all work on the human imagination in a similar way. They tell us that greatness can vanish. They tell us that water can hide what stone once displayed. They tell us that memory may outlive evidence. But not every drowned tradition belongs to the same historical event, and not every underwater stone belongs to a lost super-civilization. The sea has covered many human places for ordinary geological reasons. Ancient coastlines around the world are full of submerged landscapes because sea levels changed after the last ice age. Fishing grounds, river mouths, old settlements, and port structures may now lie beneath water that once was land or shallow shoreline. This is not science fiction. It is part of Earth's history. Still, the idea becomes more striking in India because the epics and Puranic stories speak in such grand terms. Krishna is not just a king, he is divine. Dwarka is not just a city, it is a sacred capital. Its loss is not just urban decline, it is part of a cosmic turning point. When archaeology touches a place like that, even lightly, it touches a very deep reservoir of meaning. A stone anchor becomes more than an anchor in the public imagination. A submerged wall becomes more than a wall, it becomes a possible witness. This is where careful language matters. It is one thing to say that underwater remains near Dwarka show ancient maritime activity and settlement patterns. It is another to say the entire city described in scripture has been found exactly as written. The first is supported by research. The second is much harder. Ancient texts are layered, composed, and transmitted over long periods, filled with theology, poetry, and memory. Archaeology works with physical traces. These two records can speak to each other, but they do not always speak in the same grammar. And yet, when they do appear to echo each other, even faintly, the effect is unforgettable. Imagine a diver moving through cloudy water near the coast, passing over stone blocks and anchors half held by sand. Above, on land, pilgrims visit temples and speak Krishna's name. Around them, the modern town continues its ordinary life, shops opening, bells ringing, people arriving by road and rail. Below, the sea keeps older evidence in a shifting blue silence. It is hard not to feel that two worlds are overlapping, one devotional and one archaeological, one sung and one measured, one above the water and one below. The mystery deepens because ancient Dwarka, whether as text, city, port, or sacred idea, belongs to a larger network of Indian ocean movement. The western coast of India was connected to trade routes reaching Arabia, East Africa, the Persian Gulf, and beyond. Long before modern engines, sailors used winds, currents, stars, seasonal patterns, and coastal knowledge to cross large distances. A port city in such a location would not be a remote settlement at the edge of the map. It would be a participant in a wide maritime world. Goods, languages, beliefs, and technologies could move through it. This is important because lost knowledge does not have to be isolated. It can travel through trade. In a civilization where trade and sacred geography meet, a city can become wealthy in more than one way. It can gather material goods through commerce and gather spiritual power through story. Dwarka has both. It is associated with Krishna's rule, and it stands at a coastal gateway. The sacred and the maritime reinforce each other. A pilgrim city can also be an old port. A port can also become sacred. The sea can bring merchants and myths. The legends describe Dwarka as carefully planned, fortified, and splendid. Some versions speak of golden palaces, broad roads, gardens, assembly halls, and great order. These descriptions may be theological and literary, but they also reflect an ancient admiration for urban planning. The ideal city in many traditions is not random. It is measured, protected, beautiful, and morally charged. A well-planned city reflects a well-ordered world. In Krishna's case, Dwarka becomes the place where divine wisdom enters political life. It is a city of rule, strategy, family, duty, and destiny. When such a city sinks, the loss is not only physical, it marks the end of an age. That end of an age matters. In Hindu tradition, Krishna's departure is associated with the beginning of the Kali Yuga, the age of decline and disorder. The sinking of Dwarka, then, can be read not only as a coastal disaster, but as a cosmic sign. The city disappears because the world has changed. The sea covers the old order. What remains is memory, pilgrimage, and longing. This is one reason the story has lasted. It gives a shape to the feeling that something great once existed and is no longer reachable. That is almost the definition of a lost civilization. But was it advanced? That depends on what we mean by advanced. If we mean flying machines, anti-gravity platforms, or a hidden technology able to raise cities from the sea, we do not have evidence for that. If we mean maritime skill, urban life, religious complexity, coastal adaptation, and the ability to preserve memory across centuries, then yes, the world around Dwarka was advanced in ways that deserve respect. The problem is that modern people often recognise advancement only when it resembles our own machines. Ancient advancement may appear instead as navigation without engines, water management without concrete pumps, astronomy without telescopes, architecture without steel frames, and oral tradition without printed books. Dwarka asks us to broaden the idea of knowledge. A sailor who knows the monsoon winds carries knowledge. A priest who preserves a ritual calendar carries knowledge. A builder who understands stone and tide carries knowledge. A storyteller who keeps alive the memory of a drowned place carries knowledge. None of these people need to own a machine for their world to be sophisticated, and yet because their knowledge was embodied in practice rather than stored in the way modern archives store information, much of it can vanish without leaving clear evidence. This is perhaps the most haunting possibility at Dwarka. Not that a perfect golden city lies waiting intact under the waves, but that a real coastal civilization, or several phases of coastal life, left behind memories that later became inseparable from sacred tradition. The city of Krishna may be a divine story. It may also be wrapped around older memories of real places by the sea. The underwater finds may belong to different periods, different activities, different settlements, and still contribute to the same atmosphere of loss. The truth may not be one clean discovery, but a layered coastline where faith remembered more than archaeology can yet prove. The sea, after all, is excellent at layers. It covers, exposes, scatters, and returns. Fishermen may know areas where nets catch on stone. Divers may see shapes that maps miss. Local stories may preserve names long after official records disappear. Temples may be rebuilt again and again on or near sacred ground, each new structure standing above older phases that only excavation can reveal. A living sacred city is not a museum frozen in time. It is a place constantly renewed. That renewal can protect memory, but it can also complicate the evidence because old and new are always touching. Some of the strongest claims about Dwarka should be treated with caution. It has sometimes been presented as if archaeology has conclusively verified every detail of the Mahabharata description. That is too simple. Other voices dismiss the entire connection as imagination, which may also be too simple. The wiser path is slower. Dwarka is historically and religiously important. The region shows evidence of ancient occupation and maritime activity. The stories of Krishna's city are powerful and old. The sea has yielded objects that keep the discussion alive. Between those statements lies a large and fascinating space. In that space, the lost civilization idea can be explored without becoming careless. We can ask whether ancient Indian texts preserve memories of environmental change. We can ask whether coastal settlements were more extensive than once believed. We can ask how maritime trade shaped sacred geography. We can ask why the story of a drowned city became so central to Krishna's world. We can ask whether archaeology may one day find more, and whether the seabed still holds structures hidden beneath sand. These are real questions. They do not require us to leap immediately to extraterrestrial builders, but they also do not require us to pretend the mystery is empty. Then there is the emotional side. Dwarka matters because it speaks to a fear and a hope shared by many cultures. The fear is that everything we build can be taken. The hope is that memory can survive the taking. A city may sink, but its name remains. A palace may vanish, but a story continues. A harbour may disappear, but anchors remain on the seabed like punctuation marks at the end of forgotten journeys. People die, dynasties fade, coastlines change, but a sacred place can keep calling. This calling is why modern Dwarka is not only an archaeological subject, it is alive with worship. The Dwarkadish temple draws pilgrims who come not to solve a historical puzzle, but to stand in Krishna's presence. For them, the question of underwater remains may be interesting, even moving. But faith does not depend on a diver's report. The sacred reality of Dwarka is already present in ritual, prayer, and tradition. This is important to remember because mystery tourism can sometimes treat living faith as background decoration. But Dwarka is not just a clue in someone's ancient technology theory. It is a living holy city. Any journey through its mystery should move with respect. Respect does not mean avoiding questions. It means asking them without stripping the place of its own meaning. Was there an ancient port here? Yes, the evidence points strongly to maritime importance in the region. Did the sea claim parts of earlier settlement or structures? Coastal change makes that very possible, and underwater finds keep the question open. Was this the exact Dwarka of Krishna as described in sacred literature? That remains a matter of belief, interpretation, and debate. Was there a lost civilization with machines beyond modern understanding? There is no clear evidence for that, but was there a deep and complex ancient world behind the memory of Dwarka, one whose full story is not yet recovered? That is not only possible, it is likely. And perhaps this is where Dwarka becomes more interesting than the wildest version of the legend. A city built by gods and swallowed overnight is dramatic, but a sacred memory formed from real coastal life, maritime skill, religious imagination, environmental change, and centuries of devotion is richer. It shows how human beings transform loss into meaning. It shows how a shoreline can become scripture. It shows how archaeology and faith can stand beside one another, not always agreeing, but both looking toward the same water. Still, when the sun lowers over the Arabian Sea, it is easy to understand why people dream bigger. The water shines. The horizon becomes soft. The sound of waves repeats the same old sentence it has spoken for thousands of years. Somewhere below, stones rest in sand. Some may be anchors, some may be structural remains, some may be natural, some may still be waiting to be identified. Above them, the name Dwarka continues to live, carried by pilgrims, priests, scholars, divers, and storytellers. It is both place and possibility. And if the lost Hindu civilization we are searching for exists anywhere, perhaps it does not exist in one hidden city waiting to be found whole. Perhaps it exists in these overlaps, in the way a sacred text remembers a coastline, in the way a port becomes a pilgrimage site, in the way underwater stones awaken old stories, in the way people keep asking whether the past was larger than the surviving evidence. Dwarka does not answer all those questions, but it gives them a shore to stand on. Leaving Dwarka, we move from water back to stone, but not ordinary stone. The next mystery is not hidden by the sea. It is visible in broad daylight, carved into a cliff face with such confidence that it almost feels reversed from normal building. Most temples are assembled block by block, rising from the ground toward the sky. But at Ellora, one of the greatest monuments in the world was cut downward from living rock, released from the mountain by removing everything that was not temple. After the sunken city beneath Krishna's sea, the path leads inland toward Kailasa, where ancient builders did not move a mountain exactly. They found a god inside it and carved the mountain away. After Dwarka, where the sea keeps its secrets under moving water, Kailasa Temple gives us the opposite kind of mystery. Nothing about it is hidden. It stands in daylight. It can be walked around, photographed, measured, studied, touched by the eye from many angles. It is not buried beneath sand, not lost beneath waves, not known only through legend. And yet somehow being visible makes it even more astonishing. Because once you understand what you're looking at, the mind has to pause for a moment and quietly ask, wait, how exactly did human beings do that? Kailasa Temple sits at Ellora in Maharashtra, part of a long line of rock-cut monuments carved into a basalt cliff. The full Ellora complex includes Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain caves, created across several centuries, a rare and powerful reminder that ancient India was not a single flat story, but a layered world of religions, rulers, artists, patrons, and communities working near one another through time. Along this cliff, Sanctuaries and monasteries were not built in the ordinary way, they were excavated. The mountain was entered. Rooms, pillars, shrines, halls and sculptures were brought out by taking rock away. It is architecture by subtraction, which sounds simple until you remember that if you remove the wrong stone, you cannot put it back with a polite apology and some extra plaster. And then, among these many caves, stands Kailasa, the great monolithic temple dedicated to Shiva. It is often called Cave 16, which is a very modest label for something that looks less like a cave and more like a freestanding temple complex released from the body of a mountain. Most buildings are made by addition. A foundation is laid. Blocks are lifted. Pillars are placed. Walls rise. Roofs are set. The building grows upward, piece by piece, like a sentence being written one word at a time. Kailasa was different. The builders began with a cliff and carved downward. They cut around the future temple from the top, then worked their way into the mass, creating open courtyards, towers, stairways, halls, sculpted panels, elephants, shrines and bridges by removing everything that was not part of the design. That is the detail that has made Kailasa famous far beyond the world of art history. It was carved from the top down. Even if someone tells you this calmly, even if it appears in a guidebook with a neat little diagram, the idea remains difficult to absorb. A mistake in this kind of work is not like misplacing a brick. There is no easy reset. There is no pile of spare mountain waiting nearby. The builders had to imagine the temple inside the rock before it existed in open air. They had to know how deep to cut, how far to leave a wall, how wide to open a court, how much stone could safely remain, and how to coordinate teams working across different levels of the same enormous mass. It was not only labour, it was planning at a scale that still feels slightly unreal. This is why Kailasa often becomes a centerpiece in claims about lost ancient technology. People look at it and say ordinary tools could not have done this. They imagine machines that soften stone, beams that cut through basalt, anti-gravity systems, or knowledge passed down from gods, extraterrestrials, or an earlier civilization that vanished before leaving behind its instruction manual. The temptation is understandable. The temple does not look like something that should have been dug out of rock by hammer, chisel, patience, and human organization. It looks like a finished temple that somehow sank into the cliff and then was uncovered. It looks reversed. It looks like construction running backward. But the word ordinary is doing a lot of unfair work there. Ancient Indian rock-cut architecture had been developing for many centuries before Kailasa. The people who made it were not improvising with a few sharp stones and a hopeful attitude. They inherited traditions of excavation, sculpture, measurement, religious architecture, and stoneworking. Across India, caves had already been cut for Buddhist, Hindu and Jain purposes. Pillars had been shaped from living rock. Facades had been carved to imitate wooden buildings. Halls had been planned with careful symmetry. Sculptors knew how basalt behaved. Engineers understood mass, support, drainage, slope, and sequence. Kailasa may be extraordinary, but it did not emerge from a world without skill. It emerged from a world where skill had been deepening for generations. Still, even after we say this, the wonder remains. In fact, it grows. Because now the question is not whether humans could have done it. The question is how a human society became so confident in its own method that it dared to attempt this at all. Imagine being the first master planner responsible for the work. In an ordinary temple, if the plan changes, there may be some flexibility. Here, the plan had to be held inside the mountain. Every cut mattered. Each removed section narrowed the choices that remained. The temple was not assembled. It was revealed. That makes the process feel almost like sculpture, except the sculpture is the size of a small sacred world. The temple's name points us toward its meaning. Kailasa refers to Mount Kailash, the sacred mountain associated with Shiva. In Hindu imagination, Mount Kailash is not merely a high place in the Himalayas. It is the home of Shiva, a cosmic mountain, a place where earthly geography opens toward divine presence. To carve Kailasa Temple, was not only to create a building for worship, it was to create a mountain of Shiva from another mountain. It was a sacred translation, turning basalt in Maharashtra into a vision of the divine Himalaya. The mountain was copied, concentrated, and brought into stone form for worshippers who could enter, circle, and experience it. This matters because the temple's impossible feeling is not accidental. It was probably meant to overwhelm. A person entering the court would not simply see a shrine. They would see a whole sacred landscape cut into rock, with the central temple rising from a space carved around it, like a mountain standing inside a mountain's absence. There are elephants along the base, as if the structure rests on living strength. There are sculpted panels showing scenes from Hindu mythology, including stories of Shiva and Vishnu. There are pillars, guardians, stairways, and carved surfaces filled with sacred action. The stone is not blank. It is crowded with meaning. In one of the most famous sculptural themes associated with the temple, Ravana shakes Mount Kailash. The story tells of Ravana, the powerful king of Lanka, trying to lift or disturb Shiva's mountain, only for Shiva to press it down with effortless divine force. The image is perfect for this site: a mountain, a god, a mighty being, a test of strength, and stone itself turned into drama. When carved into a rock-cut temple, the story gains another layer. The builders are not only showing a myth about a mountain, they are carving that myth into a mountain they have transformed. It is storytelling, theology, architecture, and geology at once. For those searching for signs of a lost Hindu civilization, Kailasa feels especially important because it demonstrates something we often forget. Ancient sacred art was not small thinking. It was not content to make a room and place an image inside it. It wanted to shape space itself into a religious idea. The temple is a kind of cosmic machine, though not in the metallic sense. It arranges movement, attention, light, shadow, sound, and story. A visitor enters, walks, looks upward, circles, pauses before panels, and moves deeper toward the sacred center. The body becomes part of the ritual design. The temple guides the mind without needing to explain itself. This is one reason fringe theories often gather around it. Kailasa already feels like a machine for transformation. Modern imagination then asks whether it might once have been a machine in a more literal way. Was the temple built over an energy point? Did its shape resonate with hidden forces? Did the builders know how to work with vibration, frequency, or magnetic fields? Could it have been a receiver, a portal, or a map of cosmic power? These questions are speculative, and they should not be confused with established evidence. But they are not random. They arise because the temple's design is so intentional that it seems to invite hidden functions. The more grounded answer is still remarkable. Temples often had ritual, acoustic, social, and symbolic functions at the same time. Stone chambers can shape sound. Courtyards can frame light. Axes and orientations can connect architecture to direction and movement. Sculptures can teach stories to those who cannot read. A temple can organize society by drawing pilgrims, patrons, priests, artists, traders, and rulers into a shared sacred economy. It can project political power, because a king who sponsors such a monument is not only building for a deity, he is showing that his rule participates in cosmic order. In this sense, Kailasa was not just a place of worship. It was a statement carved so deeply into the earth that time itself would have trouble ignoring it. The temple is usually associated with the Rashtrakuta King Krishna I in the 8th century, though scholars have debated the exact sequence of construction and later additions. This attribution matters because it places Kailasa within a real political and artistic world, not in an empty mythical past. The Rashtrakutas were powerful rulers in the Deccan, and their patronage helped produce one of the greatest monuments of Indian art. But even if a king commissioned it, the achievement belonged to many people. A king can order a temple. He cannot personally carve every pillar, plan every line, or solve every engineering problem. Behind the royal name stand countless unnamed workers, master builders, sculptors, supervisors, labourers, toolmakers, and ritual specialists. Those unnamed people are easy to lose in a mystery story, but they are the heart of the mystery. It is tempting to replace them with gods or aliens because the result feels too large. But perhaps the more respectful wonder is to imagine them clearly. Men standing on exposed rock in the heat, teams cutting channels down into basalt, supervisors marking lines, sculptors roughing out forms and then refining them slowly, workers hauling away broken stone in baskets, tool edges being sharpened again and again, dust in the air, instructions shouted across levels, the sound of hammer strikes echoing through the cliff, days becoming months, months becoming years, and the temple slowly appearing not by magic, but by the repeated decision to keep removing stone. That repeated decision is almost harder to imagine than a machine. Modern people are used to speed. We expect construction to be loud, mechanized, and impatient. If something takes too long, we assume something is wrong. Ancient builders lived differently with time. A project could exceed one season, one ruler, even one generation. The reward was not immediate convenience. The reward was permanence, devotion, royal memory, cosmic order, and the feeling that a human act could speak across centuries. Kailasa speaks very well. It has outlived the hands that made it, the court that sponsored it, and many of the political reasons that brought it into being. The top-down carving method also affects how we think about the design. If you build upward, you can see the building grow from foundation to roof. If you carve downward, the roof and upper forms appear first. In a way, the temple begins with the sky and descends toward the earth. That is a beautiful coincidence, or perhaps more than coincidence. A temple of Kailasa, the mountain of Shiva, revealed from above, seems to mirror the idea of divine form descending into the material world. The builders may have chosen the method for practical reasons because it was the best way to free the monolith from the cliff. But sacred architecture often turns practical necessity into meaning. What begins as engineering can become symbolism without losing its engineering. This is where myth and construction overlap again. According to a later legend, the temple was built in an impossible hurry, because a queen had vowed to fast until she saw the top of the shrine. An architect then promised a method that would reveal the top first, allowing her vow to be fulfilled. Whether or not this story has any historical value, it captures something true about the site. The top matters. The upper form had to appear before the rest. The legend understands the weirdness of the method and turns it into a human story of devotion, crisis, and cleverness. Myths often do that. They preserve the emotional shape of a technical fact, even when the details are wrapped in drama. The amount of rock removed from Kailasa has often been described in enormous figures, and popular accounts sometimes repeat numbers with great confidence. We should be careful with exact totals, because estimates can vary and are not always based on the same measurements. But whatever number we choose, the central fact is obvious to the eye. A vast quantity of basalt had to be cut away, and it was not removed randomly. It was removed to leave behind a planned, sculpted, usable, sacred structure. This required not only effort, but negative thinking in the architectural sense. The builders had to think in absences. Remove this to create a courtyard. Remove that to leave a bridge. Cut here to release a pillar. Stop there, or the form is lost. There is a quiet intelligence in that kind of work. It is not the intelligence of a computer calculating instantly. It is the intelligence of practice, memory, and disciplined vision. It is easy for modern people to underestimate this because it does not come with a screen. But a master stone carver reading a cliff face may notice things most of us would never see. Grain, fracture, density, weathering, sound, resistance, the feel of the tool strike. The stone speaks through the hand. That kind of knowledge is difficult to write down fully. It lives in apprenticeship. When the tradition weakens or changes, later people may look at the result and say, impossible. And yet the temple is there, proving that it was possible. The lost technology theory often begins from that emotional contradiction. It seems impossible, but it exists. Therefore, perhaps unknown technology was used. But another path is available. It seems impossible to us because we are separated from the methods, social systems, and patience that made it possible. That does not remove mystery, it relocates it. Instead of searching for vanished lasers, we search for vanished expertise. Instead of imagining anti-gravity, we imagine a civilization that could organize labor and sacred purpose with a seriousness we rarely encounter now. That may be less flashy, but it is not less profound. Still, Kailasa does have a way of making even grounded explanations feel slightly thin. Stand in the courtyard and look at the central shrine rising from the rock. Notice that it's not a separate building placed there. It is the original mountain, spared and shaped. Walk around it and remember that the empty space around you is also man-made, not by filling, but by absence. Look at the elephants, the panels, the roof forms, the galleries, the vertical faces of the surrounding cliff. Every surface tells you that the builders were thinking in 3 dimensions with complete confidence. The whole site feels planned from a view no single worker could physically occupy while carving. That does not mean they had aerial technology. It means they had drawings, measurements, models, inherited forms, and leadership capable of holding the design together across time. But the feeling remains almost aerial, as if the temple had first been seen from above. Perhaps that is one reason it fits so easily into the larger theme of Vimanas and sky knowledge. A design conceived from above, carved from above, dedicated to a mountain of the gods, filled with mythic scenes, and executed on a scale that still overwhelms the senses. You do not need to believe it was built by beings from the sky to understand why the sky enters the conversation. The temple itself pulls the imagination upward, and then it pulls it inward, because despite its size, Kailasa is not only about spectacle. The deeper purpose is sacred presence. Shiva is not merely a figure in a story here. He is the center around which the temple's meaning turns. Shiva is destruction and renewal, stillness and wildness, ascetic silence and cosmic dance. A temple carved by removing stone has a strangely Shiva-like quality. It destroys in order to reveal. It takes away in order to create. It turns absence into form. The mountain is cut, broken, emptied, and yet from that removal comes a sacred space that feels more alive than the original cliff. This is not just construction, it is transformation. That transformation may be the real secret of Kailasa. Not a secret in the sense of a hidden chamber, though hidden chambers are always welcome in a good mystery. It is a secret of intention. The builders looked at rock and did not see an obstacle. They saw potential form. They saw a god's mountain inside a cliff. They saw that by cutting downward, they could bring the sacred peak into visibility. This is the kind of imagination that lies behind many ancient megastructures. It begins with a place and asks what the place wants to become. The surrounding Ellora complex adds to the feeling because Kailasa does not stand alone in a cultural desert. It belongs among Buddhist viharas, Hindu shrines, and Jain monuments, all carved into the same long geological body. The cliff becomes a shared sacred archive. Different traditions enter the same stone. This gives Ellora a rare atmosphere of continuity and coexistence. It is not one moment but many. Not one religious voice, but several. The lost civilization idea often searches for one hidden source behind everything. But Ellora suggests another possibility. Civilization as accumulation. Layer after layer of devotion, patronage, technical skill and artistic exchange, each one adding to the cliff's memory. This accumulation is itself a kind of megastructure, even beyond Kailasa. The entire cliff was transformed by centuries of work. That long sequence tells us that ancient India's builders were not isolated miracle workers. They were part of networks of craft, religion, trade, politics, and learning. Techniques developed, moved, changed, and were reinterpreted. A sculptural style from one region could influence another. A temple form known from structural architecture could be recreated in rock. A sacred mountain from myth could be made present in basalt. Civilization was not a single spark. It was a slow fire carried from hand to hand. And maybe this is what mainstream archaeology sometimes struggles to communicate to the public. The careful explanation is not boring. It is only made boring when it is reduced to dates and labels. Saying Kailasa was carved in the 8th century under Rashtrakuta patronage does not solve the wonder. It gives the wonder a historical home. Saying it was made with tools and labour does not make it ordinary. It makes the labour almost unimaginable. Saying it is dedicated to Shiva does not close the question. It opens the entire world of Hindu sacred imagination, where mountains, gods, demons, cosmic order, and human devotion meet in stone. The more extreme theories can still be mentioned, but they become smaller beside the real achievement. Did anti-gravity lift the stone? There was no need to lift what was never separated. Did extraterrestrials cut the temple? The known tradition of Indian rock cutting gives us a human path, even if every detail is not fully reconstructed. Was it a stargate? Not in any proven mechanical sense, but as a sacred threshold, a place meant to move people from the ordinary world toward the presence of Shiva. It absolutely functioned as a gate of another kind. Ancient people did not need science fiction terms to create passages between states of being. That may be the key to reading these places. A stargate in modern imagination is a machine that moves the body across space. A temple in ancient sacred geography moves the mind, the community, and the soul across meaning. One requires technology, the other requires ritual, architecture, and belief. Both are built around the idea of crossing. So when modern people call a place like Kailasa a portal, they may be using the wrong language for a feeling that is not entirely wrong. The temple is a threshold. It was designed to be one, not to another planet perhaps, but to another scale of reality. As the light changes across the temple, the carvings shift. Shadows settle into reliefs. Pillars deepen. Edges sharpen and soften. The stone seems less like a dead material and more like a surface still telling stories. That is one of the great powers of rock-cut architecture. It keeps the mountains age while carrying human intention. A brick can be made, moved, and placed. A carved cliff remains tied to the earth's own body. Kailasa is both natural and artificial, both mountain and temple, both geology and devotion. This double identity gives it an authority that ordinary buildings rarely have. And so, as we stand before it in thought, the question returns in a calmer form. Was this the work of a lost civilization? In one sense, no. We can place Kailasa within known Indian history, within Ellora, within the Rashtrakuta period, within rock-cut architectural traditions. In another sense, yes, but not perhaps as the wildest theories imagine. It is the work of a civilization whose living methods, working voices, and full mental world are partly lost to us. The monument survives, but the complete chain of knowledge that produced it does not. We have the stone sentence, but not the entire language in which it was first spoken. That is why Kailasa remains so powerful. It does not merely challenge our understanding of ancient tools. It challenges our understanding of ancient ambition. It asks us to imagine a society willing to remove a mountain's worth of stone for the sake of a sacred vision. It asks us to picture planning without modern computers, accuracy without laser levels, coordination without radios, devotion without hurry, and artistry without the promise that the artist's name would be remembered. It asks us to give ancient builders back their full intelligence. And once we do, the lost civilization behind the megastructure starts to look different, less like a hidden empire of machines, and more like a hidden depth of human capability. A depth carried by people who knew how to bind myth to stone so tightly that the result could outlast kingdoms. A depth that could make a mountain into a temple, a cliff into an archive, and removal into creation. From Kailasa, our path moves toward a much smaller carving, one that does not overwhelm by size but by suggestion. After the mountain cut from the top down, we turn toward a circular pattern in stone, a strange diagram near an ancient monastic landscape in Sri Lanka. It has been called a star map, a cosmic chart, even a possible gateway by those who see ancient technology in its lines. Compared with Kailasa, it is quiet. It does not rise like a temple or sink like a city. It waits on stone with circles, shapes and markings that seem to invite the eye into a different kind of mystery, where the question is not how did they carve so much, but what exactly were they trying to show? After Kailasa, the eye is almost tired from scale. The mind has been asked to imagine a mountain carved downward, courtyards opened from solid basalt, and a temple revealed by removing what was not wanted. So it is almost strange to turn now towards something much smaller, quieter, and less physically overwhelming. Sakwala Chakraya does not tower above the land. It does not stretch beneath the sea. It does not contain a palace, a bridge, or a field of carved pillars. It is a diagram cut into rock, a circular pattern on a stone face near the ancient city of Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, and yet, for many people, it has become one of the most mysterious carvings in South Asia. The reason is simple. It looks like it is trying to tell us something. Not in the way a statue tells a story through a recognizable god, king, animal or scene. Not in the way a temple tells us where to walk and where to bow. Sakwala Chakraya is different. It is made of circles, divisions, lines and symbols arranged in a way that seems deliberate but not immediately readable. It has the feeling of a chart, a map, a plan, a coded picture of something beyond ordinary sight. And when an ancient carving looks like a chart but refuses to explain itself, the imagination arrives very quickly, usually wearing comfortable shoes and carrying far too many theories. The carving lies in Ranmasu Uyana, often described as an ancient royal garden near Isrumuniya, and Tisawewa in Anuradhapura. The name Ranmasu Uyana is often translated as the Goldfish Park or Royal Pleasure Garden, a place connected with water, rock, pools, and the refined landscape traditions of ancient Sri Lanka. This matters because the carving is not sitting in an empty wilderness. It is part of a setting shaped by human use, water management, monastic presence, royal leisure, and sacred geography. The surrounding area already carries layers of meaning before we ever look at the circle in the stone. Anuradhapura itself was one of the great ancient cities of Sri Lanka, a capital, a Buddhist centre, a landscape of stupas, reservoirs, monasteries, processional routes, and sacred memory. It was a city where water and religion were deeply connected. Reservoirs were not merely practical storage systems, though they were certainly practical and often brilliantly so. They were also part of a larger relationship between kingship, merit, agriculture, and survival. To control water in the dry zone was to make life possible. To build tanks, channels, gardens, and bathing pools was to show both technical skill and social power. So when we encounter a mysterious carving near this world of water and stone, it is worth remembering that the landscape around it was already engineered, already symbolic, and already alive with meaning. The name Sakwala Chakraya is often translated as something like universe cycle or cosmic circle. Even that name opens a door. Sakwala can refer to a world system or cosmic realm in Buddhist cosmology, while Chakraya suggests a wheel or circle. So before modern people began calling it a stargate, the older interpretation already leaned toward the cosmos. The carving's circular form, its central rings, its surrounding band, and its small repeated symbols all encouraged early scholars to read it as a cosmographical diagram, a picture of the universe as understood through Buddhist cosmology, with Mount Meru surrounding seas, worlds, and cosmic zones represented in simplified form. That interpretation may sound modest compared with a portal to another galaxy, but it is not small. A cosmographical chart is a serious thing. It means that someone carved not merely a decorative pattern, but an attempt to represent the structure of reality. Imagine that for a moment. A person, or a group of people, stood before a rock face and decided to place the universe onto it. Not the universe as photographed by telescopes, not the universe as mapped by satellites, but the universe as understood through sacred teaching, inherited imagination, and symbolic order. The result is not a modern star map, but it may be a map of meaning, and maps of meaning can be just as powerful as maps of distance. Still, the carving is strange. It does not fit easily into the expectations of a casual visitor. If you come to Anuradhapura ready to see stupas, Buddha images, moonstones, guard stones, inscriptions, bathing ponds and monastic ruins, Sakwala Chakraya interrupts the pattern. It is not a familiar devotional image. It does not show a scene that can be identified at once. Its symbols invite the viewer to decode rather than simply admire. That is why some people have treated it as something outside the normal tradition, perhaps a remnant of older knowledge placed in a later sacred landscape. The more dramatic name, Sri Lanka's Stargate, has helped carry the mystery across the internet. A Stargate suggests a machine or a doorway, a technology that allows travel between Earth and outer space, or between dimensions, or between realms that should not normally touch. The word belongs more to modern science fiction than ancient archaeology, but it has attached itself strongly to this carving because the design looks circular, technical, and unexplained. Some have connected it with other supposed gates around the world. Some have pointed to the nearby water systems and argued that water might have played a role in some lost technology. Some have imagined 4 people sitting before the chart, activating it like a console. Once this kind of story begins, it is very hard to put it back into a quiet archaeological folder. But if we slow down, as we should, the carving becomes more interesting rather than less. It does not need to be a literal gate to be a threshold. It may have helped monks, visitors, or ritual specialists think about the structure of the cosmos. It may have functioned as a teaching tool. It may have been used in meditation. It may have represented Buddhist cosmology in a way that made the unseen order visible. It may also have had a purpose we still do not fully understand. The fact that the Stargate theory is unsupported does not mean the carving is solved. It only means that we should be careful about the kind of mystery we choose. A real mystery does not need to shout. Sakwala Chakraya is a good example. It sits quietly on stone. It has no moving parts. It does not hum. It does not open when the moon is full, at least not in any way archaeology can confirm. But it does something subtler. It makes the viewer aware of lost interpretation. Someone once knew what these circles meant. Someone once understood why this line was here and that symbol was there. Someone looked at the finished carving and did not feel confusion. They saw order. We are the ones who arrive late, staring at a sentence from a language we only partly remember. This is one of the deepest forms of loss in ancient history. Not the loss of the object, but the loss of the reading. A carving may survive perfectly, and still its meaning may vanish. A ritual tool may remain, but the ritual is gone. A diagram may sit in full daylight, but the system of thought that made it obvious has dissolved. When we cannot read something, we often assume it must be secret. Sometimes it was not secret at all. It was simply common knowledge in a world that no longer exists. Think of the carving as a kind of ancient classroom, perhaps not literally, but in spirit. A teacher might have pointed to the central circles and explained the structure of the cosmos. A monk might have used the image to contemplate the vastness of existence. A visitor might have seen the worlds, seas, creatures, and cosmic divisions arranged in a way that made religious teaching concrete. The rock would then become a teaching surface. The universe, too large to hold in the mind, could be placed into a circle. The circle could be studied. The study could become meditation. The meditation could become a movement inward, not through space, but through understanding. This may not sound as exciting as interstellar travel, but it has its own grandeur. Ancient cosmology was not casual fantasy. It was a way of placing human life inside an ordered whole. People wanted to know where they were, not only geographically but morally and spiritually. What kind of world is this? What lies above? What lies below? Where are the realms of gods, humans, animals, spirits, and suffering? How does a person move through existence? What is the scale of reality compared with one brief human life? These were not small questions. A cosmic diagram could help organise them. And yet, the Stargate language keeps returning, because modern people also want to know where they are in the universe. We no longer picture Mount Meru at the cosmic centre in the old way, but we still build models, charts, maps, and simulations. We still try to draw what cannot be seen directly. We still convert space into circles, grids, diagrams, and screens. In that sense, Sequala Chakraya feels oddly familiar. It looks like an interface because we live in an age of interfaces. It looks like a control panel because we are surrounded by control panels. It looks like a star map because our imagination has been trained by astronomy graphics, films, and spacecraft displays. We may be seeing our own world reflected back from the old stone. This does not mean the modern reaction is meaningless. It tells us something important about the carving's visual power. If a pattern carved centuries ago can still make people think of planets, dimensions, cosmic travel, and hidden knowledge, then it is doing more than filling space on a rock. Its arrangement carries a sense of system. Humans are very sensitive to systems. We see a circle and look for a centre. We see repeated symbols and look for rules. We see divisions and imagine categories. We see a diagram and assume there must be instructions. The carving activates this part of the mind beautifully. The nearby seats, often mentioned in popular accounts, add fuel to the mystery. If people sat facing the carving, what were they doing? Listening to instruction, meditating, performing a ritual, resting in the shade, meeting in a small group, watching someone explain the diagram? The answer is uncertain. But the arrangement does suggest that the carving was not meant to be ignored. It was placed where people could face it. That is enough to make us imagine a scene. 4 people seated before the universe on stone, their attention held by a circular map whose meaning was clear to them and hidden from us. Water nearby deepens the atmosphere again. Ramasu Uyana is associated with ponds, channels, and old hydraulic design. In modern Stargate theories, water often becomes part of the imagined mechanism, as if the ancient builders used reservoirs and flowing water to power something. There is no good evidence for that. But water did matter deeply in ancient Sri Lankan engineering and sacred life. It shaped gardens, supported communities, cooled spaces, reflected light, and made royal landscapes possible. Water also carries symbolic weight in many religious traditions. It purifies, separates, connects, and marks transition. So even without a machine, the combination of cosmic diagram and water landscape is meaningful. It places the map of worlds near the element that sustains life and suggests passage. This is where the idea of a portal can be gently reinterpreted. A portal is a passage. In modern speculation, it is a device for physical travel. In ancient religious practice, a diagram could also be a passage, but for attention. A mandala, for example, is not usually a machine in the mechanical sense, yet it can guide the mind through layers of sacred space. A cosmological chart can move the viewer from the ordinary world into contemplation of vast scales. A person does not step through the stone. The mind crosses. That crossing may have been the point. If Sequala Chakraya was used in meditation, teaching, or cosmological reflection, then it belongs to the long human tradition of making the invisible visible. People have always tried to draw what cannot be directly touched. The path of the sun, the phases of the moon, the structure of heaven, the underworld, the cycles of rebirth, the order of the cosmos, the unseen forces of fate, karma, time, and divine law. A circle is a natural form for these things because it suggests completeness, cycle, return, and enclosure. The wheel is one of the most powerful symbols in South Asian traditions. from the Dharma wheel to cosmic cycles of time. A cosmic wheel carved in stone is not a strange idea at all. It is exactly the kind of image a civilization deeply concerned with cycles might create. But the details still matter. The central rings, the divisions, the surrounding creatures, and the overall pattern do not yield one universally accepted modern reading. Earlier interpretations link the centre to Mount Meru and the surrounding rings to cosmic seas and worlds. Others have proposed different readings, from maps of the Earth to diagrams of evolution, astrology, or tantric understanding. The very range of interpretations tells us that we are looking at an object whose original context has thinned. It is not that no one has tried to understand it. It is that each attempt depends on clues that are incomplete. This is often the case with unusual ancient objects. If a carving belongs clearly to a known artistic tradition, scholars can compare it with many examples. If it has inscriptions, those may help. If it appears in a ritual context described by texts, its purpose may become clearer. But when a diagram is unusual, uninscribed and isolated, certainty becomes difficult. We can describe what is carved. We can compare it with cosmological ideas. We can examine the setting. We can look for parallels. But at some point, the final step into the mind of the maker remains out of reach. That distance is where wonder lives. The lost Hindu civilization theme enters here carefully, because Sakwala Chakraya is rooted more directly in a Sri Lankan and Buddhist context than a Hindu one. Yet the broader South Asian world was never sealed into separate boxes. Buddhist, Hindu, local, royal and cosmic ideas moved through shared landscapes, languages, symbols and artistic forms. Mount Meru, cosmic oceans, layered worlds, cycles of time and sacred diagrams are not confined to one narrow tradition. They belong to a wider cosmological imagination across South and Southeast Asia. So while it would be inaccurate to treat Sakwala Chakraya simply as a Hindu artifact, it can still be part of our wider journey through ancient sacred science, cosmic mapping, and the memory of lost systems of knowledge. This distinction is important. A mystery becomes weaker when it forces every object into one story. It becomes stronger when it allows each place to remain itself. Sakwala Chakraya does not have to be Hindu in the strict sense to speak to the same ancient concern that shaped Hindu temples, Buddhist stupas, and cosmic diagrams across the region. The concern is this: how can the human mind understand a universe too large to see? How can stone help the mind hold it? How can a sacred landscape make invisible order present? In this way, Sakwala Chakraya may belong beside Kailasa, not because they look alike, but because they attempt something related. Kailasa turns a mountain into the home of a god. Sakwala Chakraya turns the cosmos into a circle on stone. One works through massive excavation. The other works through symbolic compression. One overwhelms the body. The other draws in the eye. Both ask the viewer to move beyond ordinary scale. Both suggest that ancient builders and thinkers were not only concerned with shelter, defence or decoration, they were concerned with the shape of reality. And that brings us back to the question of advanced knowledge. What counts as advanced? If we mean rockets and wormholes, Sakwala Chakraya does not give us evidence. If we mean the ability to make symbolic models of complex cosmological ideas, then it absolutely belongs to an advanced intellectual tradition. A civilization that can imagine layered worlds, cosmic cycles, sacred geography and meditation diagrams is not simple. It may not be scientific in the modern experimental sense, but it is systematic. It asks questions about scale, order, causation, and human place in the universe. It encodes answers in forms meant to be remembered. Modern science maps the universe with measurements, redshifts, telescopes, mathematical models, and spacecraft data. Ancient cosmology mapped the universe with myth, meditation, ritual, and symbolic geometry. These are not the same. We should not pretend they are. But both arise from the same human restlessness. We look up. We wonder where we are. We invent ways to make the vastness less silent. Sakwala Chakraya is one of those inventions, whether we call it a world map, cosmic wheel, teaching diagram, meditation aid, or mystery carving. The Stargate theory, then, may be best understood as a modern myth growing around an ancient cosmic symbol. It may not be historically accurate, but it reveals that the carving still succeeds in making people imagine the universe as reachable. That is no small thing. A symbol that continues to generate cosmic imagination after so many centuries has not failed. It has survived in a new language, even if that language sometimes becomes careless. Perhaps the old maker of the carving would be puzzled by talk of aliens and interstellar travel. Or perhaps, in a different way, they would understand the impulse. After all, they too were trying to picture worlds beyond immediate sight. They too believed the visible world was only part of reality. They too used circles and symbols to approach what ordinary eyes could not see. The difference is not that ancient people were unimaginative and modern people are rational. The difference is that every age imagines the cosmos using the tools it knows best. Their tools were sacred geography and cosmological teaching. Ours are space travel, computers, science fiction, and hidden technology. The stone sits between us, accepting all this attention without comment. There is something peaceful about that. Sakwala Chakraya does not argue. It does not confirm or deny. It simply remains on its rock face, weathered but present, holding its rings and marks. Around it, the old garden landscape carries the memory of water, royal leisure, and monastic quiet. Nearby, Anuradhapura's great sacred monuments remind us that this was a civilization capable of both enormous public architecture and subtle symbolic work. The small carving and the great stupas belong to the same broad human need, to place life inside a larger order. If we are honest, the mystery of Sakwala Chakraya may never be solved to everyone's satisfaction. Some will continue to call it a stargate. Some will call it a Buddhist cosmological chart. Some will see a map, a mandala, a teaching tool, a meditation focus, or an old diagram whose precise purpose is gone. The lack of final certainty is not a failure. It is part of what the object now is. Meaning has become layered on top of meaning, just as time layers itself over stone. And maybe that is why this quiet circle belongs in our journey. The lost civilization we are tracing is not only visible in giant blocks and carved mountains, it is also visible in diagrams, symbols, and intellectual systems that later ages only partly understand. A civilization is not measured only by what it can lift. It is measured by what it can imagine. The people who carved Sakwala Chakraya imagined a universe that could be placed on stone, studied, contemplated, and perhaps spiritually entered. Whether we call that a map or a mystery, it is a sign of a mind looking far beyond the garden wall. As we leave the carved circle behind, the path begins to widen again. From a small diagram of cosmic order, we turn toward one of the largest and most emotionally charged shapes in the entire region, a pale chain of shoals stretching through the shallow sea between India and Sri Lanka. There, the question is not hidden in a carved symbol, but written across the water itself. Geology sees sand, limestone, coral, currents, and changing sea levels. Devotion sees the Bridge of Rama. Mystery seekers see possible ancient engineering on a scale that would have joined two lands across the ocean. And once again, the past stands at the meeting point of faith, stone, water, and the human need to know whether a sacred story may have left a mark on the earth. From the carved circle at Ranmasu Uyana, where the universe seemed to have been pressed into stone, we now move toward a shape so large that it cannot be understood from the ground all at once. It is not a temple wall, not a fortress, not a sunken harbour, not a mountain cut into sacred form. It is a line across the sea, a pale, broken, shallow chain stretching between southeastern India and northwestern Sri Lanka, visible in maps and satellite images, known to science as Adam's Bridge, known to millions through devotion as Rama Setu, the Bridge of Rama. There are some places on Earth where the landscape seems to have read the story before we arrive. Ramasetu is one of them. Long before satellites showed its outline from above, long before modern geology described shoals, sandbanks, coral, limestone, currents, and sea level change, people already knew this place through the Ramayana. In that great epic, Rama travels south to rescue Sita from Ravana, the powerful king of Lanka. To cross the ocean, his army builds a bridge. Monkeys and bears, led by devoted allies like Hanuman and Nala, gather stones, trees, and strength. The sea is crossed. The impossible passage becomes possible. A path appears where there was only water. That story alone would have been enough to make the place sacred. But then the earth gives us a visible line, a chain of shoals between the two lands, and suddenly the story has a shape. It is not proof in the simple modern sense. It is not a signed construction record from an ancient engineer. It is not a carved inscription saying, "This was built on Tuesday. Please do not argue about it for the next few thousand years." But it is a physical feature exactly where the imagination wants one to be, and that is powerful. The sea itself seems to hold a memory of crossing. At the Indian end lies the region around Ramswaram and Dhanushkodi, a place already heavy with pilgrimage, wind, sand, temple bells, and the feeling of being near an edge. At the Sri Lankan end lies Manor Island, low and dry, facing the same shallow waters from the other side. Between them is not deep blue ocean, but a complicated stretch of pale sea, reefs, banks, sediment, and shallows. In some places the water is very shallow. From above, the formation looks like a broken causeway, as if land once reached out from both sides and nearly touched. It is easy to see why the human mind would call it a bridge. The question is what kind of bridge it is. For geology, Ramasetu is a natural formation, or at least a formation shaped by natural processes across time. The language changes depending on the study and the section being discussed. Shoals, sandbars, limestone, coral debris, barrier features, former land connections, currents, wave action, and shifting sea levels all enter the conversation. The region is shallow and dynamic. The sea here does not behave like a still museum case. It moves sand. It breaks and rebuilds banks. It covers and uncovers. It allows a feature to appear stable from far above while changing quietly at the scale of tides, storms, and seasons. For faith, Ramasetu is not merely a natural shape. It is the remembered bridge of the Ramayana, the place where Rama's devotion, duty, grief, courage, and divine purpose crossed the sea. The bridge is not important only because it joins two lands. It joins a story to the world. It gives a sacred geography to a sacred journey. Pilgrims do not come to Ramswaram only to debate sediment. They come because the place belongs to Rama, Sita, Shiva, Hanuman, and the long emotional world of the epic. In that world, the bridge is not only a structure, it is an act of faith made visible. For mystery seekers, Ramasetu becomes something even more provocative, a possible ancient engineered causeway, a megastructure hidden in shallow water, a trace of a lost civilization that knew how to build across the sea long before accepted history would allow such a project. Some imagine ordinary stones made buoyant by divine power. Others imagine lost construction techniques, perhaps connected with anti-gravity, sound, magnetism, or a forgotten science preserved in myth. The most speculative voices connect it to ancient aircraft, gods from the sky, or a worldwide network of sacred sites built by beings who understood Earth's energy lines. Once again, the old story becomes a screen on which modern imagination projects the technologies it understands and the mysteries it wants to believe. The careful path is slower. It does not flatten the place into one answer. It allows geology to speak. It allows devotion to speak. It allows the human feeling of wonder to remain without pretending that wonder itself is proof. Ramasetu is one of those rare places where the same physical feature can be studied as a natural formation, revered as a sacred bridge, and imagined as an ancient engineering mystery all at the same time, those interpretations do not carry the same kind of evidence, but they do carry meaning, and meaning matters, especially when we are dealing with a landscape that has lived for so long inside a story. The Ramayana is not a small tale. It is one of the great narrative worlds of South Asia and beyond, told in many languages, versions, performances, recitations, temple sculptures, folk plays, songs, and family memories. It has travelled across India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Southeast Asia, and farther still. Its characters are not only literary figures, for many people they are sacred presences. Rama is worshipped as an avatar of Vishnu, a model of duty, kingship, and moral order. Sita is honoured for strength, devotion, suffering, and dignity. Hanuman is loved for courage, loyalty, and impossible service. When a landscape is tied to such figures, it becomes more than a location. It becomes an emotional map. That is why Rama Setu is so difficult to discuss casually. For one person, it is a geological feature. For another, it is a holy trace. For another, it is evidence that ancient history has been underestimated. For another, it is part of national, cultural, or religious identity. The same sandbank can become scientific evidence, devotional proof, political symbol, and mystery object depending on who is looking. This is not unusual. Sacred landscapes often carry many meanings, but here, because the feature is so visible and so closely linked to a famous epic, the meanings press tightly together. If we imagine the bridge only as a modern engineering problem, we may miss its deeper force. A bridge is never just material. Even today, bridges mean connection, risk, ambition, and crossing. They join separated places, they shorten distance, they allow movement where movement was once difficult. In myth, bridges become even more charged. They can join worlds, cross oceans, defeat demons, rescue the lost, and prove that devotion can overcome nature. Rama Setu is the perfect mythic bridge because it crosses not only water, but despair. Rama stands at the edge of the sea, separated from Sita, facing the impossible. The bridge answers that impossibility. This is why the story still works. Everyone knows, in some quiet part of life, what it means to stand before an ocean that cannot be crossed. A grief, a fear, a duty, a separation, a task too large for one person. The Ramayana turns that feeling into action. Stones are gathered, the army works, the sea becomes passable. The message is not only that a bridge was built, it is that the impossible can be approached through devotion, cooperation, and courage. Whether one reads it as history, theology, literature, or all three, that meaning is strong enough to survive any geological argument. And yet the physical line remains. We cannot ignore it. The shoals between India and Sri Lanka have a real presence. They sit in shallow water and have long affected navigation. Some traditions and historical reports suggest that parts of the chain may once have been more continuous or more easily passable before storms and sea changes broke it further. Whether or not one could walk the entire crossing in a particular century depends on water levels, channels, and local conditions, but the idea of a near crossing is not absurd. The sea there is not a deep abyss. It is a shallow, shifting zone where land and water have been negotiating for a long time. This matters because natural features often inspire myths precisely because they already look meaningful. A mountain shaped like a reclining figure becomes a sleeping giant. A cave mouth becomes an entrance to the underworld. A volcanic eruption becomes the anger of a god. A chain of shoals between India and Lanka becomes Rama's bridge. The natural formation does not weaken the story. It may be what allowed the story to take root in that exact place. Ancient people were careful observers of land. They saw shapes, patterns, routes, dangers, and possibilities. They named them through stories. Could humans have modified parts of Rama Setu? That is a different and more cautious question. Across history, people have built causeways, embankments, ferry points, docks, and crossings in shallow water. Human modification of natural features is common. A natural ridge can be used, improved, marked, or mythologized. But demonstrating ancient large-scale engineering across this specific chain would require strong archaeological evidence, tools, worked stone in clear context, datable materials, construction layers, associated settlement patterns, and a sequence that shows intentional building rather than natural accumulation. The popular imagination often leaps over this difficult work because the line already looks like a bridge from above. But appearance is not enough. The sea is a gifted sculptor. It can make shapes that look planned. Still, the question is not foolish. It is reasonable to ask whether ancient people used shallow crossings, marked routes, or remembered periods when the sea was lower or the shoals more continuous. It is reasonable to ask whether the Ramayana preserves some distant awareness of the geography between India and Sri Lanka. It is reasonable to ask how old coastal memories can become epic scenes. The difficulty begins when every reasonable question is turned into a certainty before the evidence arrives. The bridge also pulls us toward the problem of time, not ordinary time, but geological time, cultural time, and sacred time all layered together. Geology asks about thousands of years of sea level change, sediment movement, reef formation, and storm damage. Archaeology asks about human settlement, travel, trade, and cultural memory. Sacred tradition speaks of events in a mythic age, where human and divine action unfold on a different scale. Modern debate wants all of these times to line up neatly, but they often do not. A sacred story may not be trying to provide a geological date. A geological study may not be able to measure the age of a memory. An archaeological object may tell us about human activity without confirming the whole epic narrative. The challenge is not to force one kind of time to swallow the others. In Hindu thought, time can be vast, cyclical, and layered with ages. The Ramayana belongs not just to a historical past, but to a moral and cosmic past. It tells of a world where divine beings walk among humans, where Dharma is tested, where landscapes hold the imprint of sacred action. To ask whether Rama Setu is historical in the modern sense is natural, but it may not exhaust the meaning of the place. A sacred bridge can be real to worshippers, because it is part of a living relationship with Rama. That reality is not the same as archaeological proof, but it is also not nothing. It shapes lives, pilgrimages, rituals, and identity. And identity has made Rama Setu especially sensitive. Discussions of the bridge have not stayed safely inside academic journals. They have entered courts, politics, environmental debates, development plans, and public argument. Projects that might affect the region, especially navigation channel proposals, have been controversial because the formation is sacred to many Hindus and environmentally significant as part of a fragile marine zone. The Gulf of Mannar and Palk Strait are not empty water. They are ecosystems, fishing grounds, and cultural landscapes. To cut, dredge, or alter such an area is not a simple technical matter. It touches livelihood, ecology, faith, and history at once. This is another way the bridge joins worlds. It links ancient epic to modern law, sacred geography to environmental policy, local fishermen to national debates, and geology to devotion. A feature that might look quiet from space can become very loud on Earth. That too is part of its story. Megastructures are not only built in the past, they are interpreted in the present. The meaning of Rama Setu is still being negotiated, not because the stones change every day, but because people keep asking what they are allowed to mean. For the lost civilization theory, Rama Setu is both attractive and dangerous. Attractive because it seems to offer a massive physical structure exactly where an epic says a massive structure should be. Dangerous because it is easy to confuse resemblance with evidence. The chain looks like a bridge. The story speaks of a bridge. Therefore some say it must be the bridge. But the real world is often more layered. It may be a natural formation that inspired or anchored the story. It may be a natural formation that was known and perhaps used by ancient travellers. It may have changed through time in ways that made crossing easier or harder. It may preserve a memory of land connection from a much older environmental phase, transformed by tradition into divine engineering. Or, for believers, it may be exactly what the tradition says it is. These possibilities are not emotionally equal for everyone, but they show why the discussion remains open in the public mind. The most spectacular versions claim that Rama's army used floating stones. In some pilgrimage contexts, porous stones associated with the story are shown as objects of wonder. Scientifically, some types of volcanic or coral-related material can be light or porous, and pumice can float, though explaining the epic through such material is not straightforward and often becomes more symbolic than geological. But the floating stone idea has become part of the atmosphere around the bridge because it expresses the larger theme perfectly. A stone should sink, but devotion makes it cross. Nature says no, the story says yes. Whether one reads this literally or spiritually, the image is unforgettable. Anti-gravity theories take that image into modern speculation. If stones floated, perhaps some lost technology made them light. If a bridge crossed the sea, perhaps ancient engineers used energy fields. If gods and Vanaras built it, perhaps those beings were not mythic but members of another species, or visitors from somewhere else. This is where the discussion moves far beyond evidence. But even these extreme ideas reveal something about how modern people think. We are so used to technology as the source of miracles that when we see a miracle in a story, we translate it into technology. Divine power becomes an unknown force. Sacred beings become extraterrestrials. Mantra becomes frequency. Mythic construction becomes advanced engineering. We are not always explaining the past when we do this. Sometimes we are simply retelling the past in the language of our own age. The older language may already be enough. In the Ramayana, the bridge is built through cooperation between Rama and his allies, with the sea itself negotiated, honoured or commanded depending on the version. The construction is not only technical, it is moral and cosmic. The natural world is not dead material. The ocean has presence, the animals have agency, the divine hero requires help, the crossing depends on loyalty. This is a very different view of engineering from the modern one. Today we often imagine construction as human will imposed on inert matter. In the epic, the bridge belongs to a universe where land, sea, animals, gods and humans are all part of a living order. That worldview may be difficult to test, but it is not primitive. It is complex in a different way. Perhaps the most respectful way to approach Ramasetu is to let it be both a physical formation and a sacred memory without forcing one to erase the other. The shoals can be studied, the currents can be mapped, the sediments can be sampled, the stories can be recited, the pilgrims can worship, the scholars can compare texts, the mystery seekers can ask their questions, hopefully with care. A place does not become less sacred because geology studies it. A geological feature does not become less natural because people love it. Human beings have always lived in a world where matter and meaning overlap. If we stand at Dhanushkodi, that overlap becomes easy to feel. Dhanushkodi itself is a place marked by loss. The old town was devastated by a cyclone in the 20th century, leaving behind ruins, sand, wind, and the sense of a settlement humbled by the sea. This modern disaster gives the region another layer of memory. It reminds us that the ocean is not only a backdrop to ancient stories, it is an active force. It can erase rail lines, homes, markets, and human confidence in a single night. When people tell stories of cities or bridges lost to the sea, we should not rush to dismiss them. Coastal people know what water can do. From that edge, looking towards Sri Lanka, the crossing does not feel like an abstract debate. It feels like distance with a shape. The land beyond is not visible in every condition, but it is present in the mind. The shallow chains suggest connection, yet the water insists on separation. This tension is exactly what a mythic bridge resolves. It gives form to longing. It says that what is separated can be joined, at least for a moment, if the cause is strong enough. In the larger journey through ancient megastructures, Rama Setu teaches a different lesson from Kailasa, or Sigiriya. Kailasa shows human beings carving a mountain into divine architecture. Sigiriya shows a king lifting power into the sky. Sakwala Chakraya shows a cosmos compressed into a diagram. Rama Setu shows landscape itself becoming a monument, whether or not human hands built every part of it. It is a megastructure in the imagination as much as in stone and sand. Its power comes from the way a natural line across the water has been absorbed into one of the greatest stories ever told. That does not make it less worthy of study. It makes it more worthy. The best mysteries are not always the ones that produce the cleanest answers. Sometimes they are the ones that show how humans create meaning from landforms, how stories preserve geography, how sacred tradition can attach itself to real places, and how the earth can seem to confirm what the heart already believes. Rama Setu may be a chain of shoals shaped by natural processes. It may also be a sacred bridge in the lives of those who revere it. It may preserve memories of older crossings, older coastlines, or older ways of understanding the sea. It may not require a lost machine to be extraordinary. And yet, the lost civilization question still lingers over the water. If ancient people saw this chain, used it, named it, and placed it inside a sacred epic, then they were doing something profound. They were turning geography into memory strong enough to last for millennia. If earlier coastlines or shallow passages influenced the story, then the Ramayana may carry echoes of landscapes changed by time. If later pilgrims and communities kept the bridge alive through devotion, then the monument was rebuilt not in stone, but in attention. Every telling of the story lays another stone across the sea. That may be the most beautiful possibility. Rama Setu is not only a bridge that might have been built once, it is a bridge continuously built by memory. The epic builds it. The pilgrims build it. The maps build it. The debates build it. The geologists, by measuring it, build another kind of bridge toward understanding. The believers, by honouring it, keep open a passage between the present and the sacred past. The skeptics, by questioning it, force the evidence to become clearer. Everyone who approaches it adds something, even disagreement. In the end, the bridge between history, faith, and the ocean does not ask us for a simple answer. It asks us to stand at the edge of certainty and look carefully. The stones and shoals do not speak in one voice. The epic speaks in another. The sea speaks in another still. Somewhere among them is a story about ancient people who knew this coastline, feared it, crossed it, worshipped near it, and remembered it through one of the most enduring narratives in the world. As we leave the shallow waters between India and Sri Lanka, the idea of a sacred landscape begins to expand eastward. The next place is not on the Indian subcontinent itself, yet it carries Hindu cosmology in stone with a scale so vast and precise that it has become one of the world's greatest monuments. Far away in Cambodia, Angkor Wat rises from a wide moat and a carefully ordered landscape, its towers shaped like a stone mountain, its galleries filled with gods, demons, kings, battles, heavens, and oceans of myth. After a bridge across the sea, we move toward a temple that tried to become the universe itself. After the shallow waters of Rama Setu, where a line of shoals carries the weight of epic memory, the road of this mystery stretches eastward, beyond India, beyond Sri Lanka, across old routes of trade, language, kingship, and belief. It leads to Cambodia, to the wide plains near Siem Reap, where the forest opens and the towers of Angkor Wat rise behind a moat so broad and still that the temple seems to float between earth and reflection. At first sight, Angkor Wat can feel less like a building and more like a thought made enormous. It is too ordered to be accidental, too vast to be casual, and too full of meaning to be treated as stone alone. This place belongs to the Khmer world, not to India in the political sense, and that distinction matters. Angkor Wat was built in Cambodia by Khmer rulers, Khmer planners, Khmer artisans, Khmer labourers, and a civilization whose achievements deserve to stand in their own right. But it was also shaped by ideas that travelled from India across Southeast Asia, carried by merchants, priests, Sanskrit texts, royal models, temple architecture, and stories of gods. Hindu cosmology did not remain locked inside the subcontinent. It crossed seas and rivers, it entered courts, it merged with local traditions, it was reimagined in new landscapes. At Angkor, those ideas did not simply arrive as copies. They were transformed into something vast, Cambodian, royal, and unforgettable. Angkor Wat was built in the early 12th century during the reign of King Suryavarman II. It was originally dedicated to Vishnu, the Preserver, one of the great deities of Hindu tradition. Later, as religious life in the region changed, the temple became associated with Buddhism as well, and today it is often seen through both Hindu and Buddhist layers. This layering is part of its power. Angkor Wat is not frozen in one moment. It has lived many lives. It has been a royal temple, a sacred landscape, a national symbol, a place of pilgrimage, an archaeological wonder, and one of the most recognisable monuments on Earth. But if we approach it slowly, before the photographs and the crowds and the famous sunrise, Angkor Wat begins with geometry. A moat surrounds it. A causeway crosses the water. Galleries run in ordered lines. Towers rise in a central group. Corridors create long views and controlled movement. The temple is arranged as a series of enclosures and rising levels, leading inward and upward toward the central sanctuary. Every part seems to belong to a larger pattern. This is why Angkor Wat fits so naturally into our search for lost sacred knowledge. It is not just large, it is organised on a cosmic scale. The usual explanation is that Angkor Wat represents Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the centre of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The central towers stand for the peaks of that mountain. The surrounding galleries and walls suggest mountain ranges. The moat suggests the cosmic ocean. A person crossing the causeway is not simply walking from outside to inside. Symbolically, they are crossing water toward the centre of the world. They are leaving ordinary space and entering a model of the universe built in stone. That idea can sound familiar now because it is often repeated in books and guides. But we should not let familiarity make it small. To build a temple as a model of the cosmos is an astonishing act of imagination. It means the king and his architects were not only thinking about worship, they were thinking about the structure of reality, the position of kingship within that reality, and the way a human body could move through sacred order. The temple did not merely point to the divine, it arranged the world around the divine. This is where the geometry of Angkor Wat becomes more than decoration. Sacred geometry is sometimes spoken about today as if it always hides secret codes, lost energy systems, or messages from beings beyond Earth. Sometimes that language goes too far, but the basic idea is real enough. Ancient builders often used measured layouts to express religious meaning. Proportion, direction, alignment, enclosure, symmetry, and repetition were not just technical choices, they were part of the temple's message. In Angkor Wat, the order of the plan helps create the experience of cosmic order. The visitor is guided across water through gates, along corridors, around carved galleries, and toward the rising centre. The body follows the geometry, and the mind follows the body. The westward orientation of Angkor Wat adds another layer of mystery. Many Khmer temples face east toward the sunrise, but Angkor Wat faces west. Scholars have debated why. One common explanation connects this orientation with Vishnu, who is sometimes associated with the west. Another explanation connects it with funerary symbolism, suggesting that the temple may have been linked to the king's own afterlife and royal memory. These interpretations do not need to cancel each other. Ancient monuments often carried more than one meaning at once. A temple could honour Vishnu, display royal power, reflect cosmic order, and prepare a king's passage into the world beyond life. The modern desire for one tidy function may not fit the ancient reality. Standing before the moat, the westward approach gives the temple a particular mood. At sunrise, the famous view is breathtaking, but the temple itself faces the direction of the setting sun, the direction of evening, completion, and in some traditions, death. The causeway leads across the water toward a place that feels both grand and solemn. It is not hard to imagine the temple as a machine of transition, not in the sense of gears and engines, but in the older sense of ritual movement. It takes the visitor from the outer world toward the sacred centre. It changes the scale of thought. It makes a person feel that they are walking through a map of something larger than life. Inside the galleries, stone becomes narrative. The walls of Angkor Wat are covered with bas-relief showing scenes from Hindu epics and mythological traditions, along with royal processions, battles, heavens, hells, gods, demons, and celestial beings. One of the most famous scenes is the churning of the ocean of milk, where gods and demons pull on the serpent Vasuki, using Mount Mandara as the churning rod to bring forth Amrita, the nectar of immortality. It is one of the great cosmic images of Hindu mythology, and at Angkor Wat it unfolds across stone with hundreds of figures participating in a vast rhythmic struggle. This scene matters deeply for our journey. The churning of the ocean is not a small myth. It is a story of cosmic effort, cooperation between enemies, divine intervention, hidden treasure, poison, immortality, and the creation of order through tremendous force. It involves a mountain, a serpent, an ocean, gods, demons, and the promise of deathless life. At Angkor Wat, carved into the walls of a temple surrounded by a moat symbolizing the cosmic ocean, the scene becomes almost self-aware. The temple is not only showing the myth, it is built in a form that echoes the myth's universe. Water outside, mountain at the centre, divine struggle on the walls, the geometry and the story reinforce each other. For mystery seekers, this kind of integration feels like evidence of a hidden system, and in a way it is. Not a hidden mechanical system, but a hidden symbolic system, one that modern visitors may only partly understand. The serpent in the churning scene can become, in modern fringe theories, a reptilian memory or a sign of non-human beings. The mountain can become an energy axis. The ocean can become a field of cosmic power. The nectar of immortality can become a lost technology for life extension. These ideas move far beyond evidence, but they grow from the richness of the original imagery. The carvings are already filled with powers that are more than human. Modern speculation simply translates them into the language of secret science. The Naga balustrades at Angkor also feed the atmosphere. Serpent forms appear across Khmer sacred architecture, often along causeways and entrances. In South and Southeast Asian traditions, Nagas are associated with water, protection, fertility, underworld realms, and sacred power. In Cambodia, serpent imagery also connects deeply with local origin myths and royal symbolism. The causeway lined with serpent forms can be read as more than ornament. It is a passage guarded by beings tied to water and the threshold between worlds. A visitor crossing the moat is not merely crossing a bridge. They are crossing a serpent-marked path toward the cosmic mountain. This is exactly the kind of ancient imagery that modern theories sometimes turn into stories of reptilian beings or non-human rulers. But again, the older meaning is already powerful. Nagas do not need to be aliens to be mysterious. They belong to a world where water, earth, fertility, danger, and divine protection were bound together in symbolic form. If anything, reducing them to modern reptilian theories can make them smaller. The Naga is not just a creature, it is a way of thinking about hidden power beneath and around the visible world. Angkor Wat's power also comes from the city around it. The temple is the most famous monument, But Angkor was not a lone temple sitting in empty jungle. It was part of a vast urban and ritual landscape, connected by roads, canals, reservoirs, temples, embankments and settlements. The wider Angkor region was one of the great pre-modern urban complexes of the world. Its water systems were not minor features. They helped shape agriculture, ritual, transport and political power. Barrays, canals, dikes, basins and moats formed an engineered landscape that responded to monsoon cycles and the needs of a large population. This matters because people often look at Angkor Wat and ask how such a temple could be built. But the better question may be how an entire civilization organised the world around such temples. Stone is visible, so stone gets attention. Water is quieter, but water may have been just as important. The Khmer world depended on managing seasonal abundance and shortage. Too much water in one season, too little in another. A great civilization in such a place had to think hydraulically. It had to shape the flow of water across the land. It had to turn the monsoon from danger into resource. That kind of engineering does not always look as dramatic as a tower, but it is the reason towers can exist. In this sense, Angkor Wat and the surrounding Angkor landscape are a reminder that ancient advancement was often ecological. It was not simply about lifting stone. It was about understanding seasons, soils, rainfall, reservoirs, canals, labour, ritual calendars, and political authority. The temple rises because the system around it could support the people who built and maintained it. A lost civilization is rarely lost because its monuments vanish first. Often, the monument remains after the social and environmental system that sustained it has changed. The stone survives like a shell after the living creature is gone. The geometry of Angkor Wat may also connect with astronomy, though here again we must move carefully. Many scholars have explored the temple's alignments, measurements, and possible connections with solar cycles. Some interpretations argue that the design encodes calendrical or cosmological numbers. Others are more cautious. Ancient builders certainly cared about direction and celestial order, but not every measurement is necessarily a secret code. Human beings are very good at finding patterns, especially in monuments already associated with cosmic meaning. Still, the possibility that Angkor Wat was planned with careful astronomical awareness is not surprising. A temple representing the cosmos would naturally be concerned with the sky. The sky above Angkor is part of the architecture, even when no one says so. At dawn, the towers become silhouettes. At sunset, the stone changes colour. During the rainy season, the moat pools reflect clouds. During the dry season, the heat sharpens the edges of the temple. The movement of light through corridors and across carvings changes the experience hour by hour. Ancient builders did not need electric illumination to understand light. They lived with it directly. They watched shadows, horizons, solstices, equinoxes, and seasonal shifts. They built in a world where the sky was the largest clock, the largest calendar, and the largest roof. This is why Angkor Wat feels like a natural part of our larger journey, even though it is geographically beyond India. It shows what happened when Hindu cosmology travelled, met Khmer kingship, and became a monument of almost unmatched scale. It is evidence not of a hidden Indian empire ruling everything from the shadows, but of a wide sacred and cultural exchange across Asia. Ideas moved. They were adopted, adapted, localized, and magnified. The result was not a copy of an Indian temple. It was Angkor Wat, a Khmer masterpiece with Hindu cosmological bones and Cambodian artistic life. If there is a lost civilization behind it, perhaps it is not a single vanished civilization at all. Perhaps it is the lost network of exchange that once connected coasts, courts, monks, merchants, astronomers, priests, sculptors, and rulers across South and Southeast Asia. We still see the monuments, but the conversations that created them are gone. We see Sanskrit inscriptions, temple plans, divine images, and shared myths, but we do not hear the debates in royal courts, the instructions from architects, the chants at consecration, the bargaining with labour groups, the training of sculptors, or the way local beliefs reshaped imported gods. That living web is the true lost world. At Angkor Wat, the builders took inherited ideas and made them enormous. The temple's scale is not only physical, it is conceptual. The moat becomes ocean, the towers become mountains, the king's temple becomes the centre of the universe. Myth becomes wall, geometry becomes procession, water becomes boundary, stone becomes authority. This is not primitive thinking. It is highly organised symbolic thinking fused with engineering. It is a civilization saying, our kingdom is not random, it has a centre, it reflects the cosmos. The ruler stands within divine order. Such claims were political as well as religious. A king who builds a cosmic temple is making a statement about power. He's not merely wealthy enough to employ workers, he is aligned with the universe. His rule is anchored in sacred order. His capital is not just a city, it is a version of the cosmic centre. This is why temple building in ancient kingdoms could be so intense. It was not private devotion alone, it was statecraft, theology, art and landscape planning combined. The temple made kingship visible in the most permanent language available: stone. The carvings of Angkor Wat also remind us that ancient people used images as archives. A person walking the galleries could encounter stories of creation, battle, duty, punishment, reward, and divine intervention. These were not merely illustrations, they were memory systems. They preserved cultural knowledge in a form that could be seen, taught, recited, and reinterpreted. Before printing presses and screens, walls could function as books, but unlike books, they surrounded the body. You did not only read the story, you walked through it. This is one of the reasons Angkor Wat still feels so immersive. A modern visitor may arrive with a camera and a short schedule, but the temple was not designed for quick consumption. It was designed for movement, return, and gradual approach. Long corridors slow the body. Repeating forms create rhythm. Doorways frame new spaces. Steps require attention. Towers draw the eye upward. Bas-reliefs pull the gaze sideways into narrative. The temple controls pace. It makes hurry feel slightly foolish. In that sense, it still teaches the visitor how to behave, even if the original rituals are partly lost. The idea of anti-gravity or lost machines appears sometimes in discussions of ancient megastructures, and Angkor Wat is not immune to it. People ask how so much sandstone was quarried, transported and assembled. They ask how the builders achieved such alignment and detail. They ask how a huge temple and water system could be created without modern equipment. These are fair questions when asked honestly. But the answers do not require machines from the stars. Khmer builders had tools, labour organisation, waterways, elephants in some contexts, rafts, rollers, ramps, skilled masons, and a state system capable of directing resources on a huge scale. The achievement is not diminished by being human. It is made greater. What modern people often underestimate is the power of organised labour in a society where religious and royal authority were deeply connected. A temple like Angkor Wat did not depend on one genius stacking stones alone in the forest. It depended on a civilization. Quarry workers, transport teams, engineers, sculptors, priests, officials, farmers producing surplus food, water managers, and rulers all formed part of the hidden structure behind the visible one. The temple is what remains when the human network has disappeared. We look at the stone and forget the society that moved around it like blood through a body. This pattern repeats across all the places we've visited. At Sigiriya, the visible rock palace hides the water engineers and gardeners below. At Dwarka, the underwater stones hide the sailors, traders and coastal communities behind the sacred memory. At Kailasa, the carved temple hides the generations of rock-cutting knowledge behind its impossible form. At Sakwala Chakraya, the diagram hides the cosmological system that made it meaningful. At Rama Setu, the line of shoals hides the old relationship between geography and epic memory. Angkor Wat gathers all of these themes into one great landscape: water, myth, geometry, royal power, cosmic order, and stone. And perhaps that is why it belongs near the end of this journey. It shows the ancient world at its most integrated. Nothing here is only one thing. The moat is practical and symbolic. The temple is political and sacred. The geometry is architectural and cosmological. The carvings are art and teaching. The king is ruler and cosmic participant. The site is Cambodian and connected to Indian religious imagination. The monument is material and mythic. Any explanation that chooses only one layer will feel incomplete. This does not mean we should abandon evidence and drift into fantasy. It means we should let the evidence be wide enough to include human meaning. Mainstream archaeology can tell us much about construction, chronology, style, kingship, hydraulic systems, and religious change. Devotional traditions can tell us how sacred forms live in memory. Art history can explain iconography. Environmental studies can explore water, climate, and urban sustainability. Mystery theories, when handled carefully, remind us that public wonder is often a sign that a monument has not been emotionally explained, even if it has been academically described. At Angkor Wat, the academic description and the emotional experience are both necessary. You can say it was built under Suryavarman II in the early 12th century and originally dedicated to Vishnu. That is true and important. But then you stand before the towers at dawn and feel the temple reflected in water, and another truth arrives without words. You feel why people build sacred monuments at all. You feel the desire to make the universe visible. You feel the human refusal to remain small, even in the face of time. The lost Hindu civilization behind these megastructures may not be a civilization in the simple archaeological sense. It may be a shared symbolic inheritance, a set of ideas about mountains, oceans, gods, cycles, kings, stars, and sacred centers that travelled and changed across centuries. It may be a network of builders who understood how to turn those ideas into stone. It may be a memory of older knowledge, not necessarily technological in the modern sense, but profound in its ability to join landscape and cosmos. Angkor Wat is one of the clearest witnesses to that inheritance, because it is so complete, so deliberate, and so vast. As we leave Angkor in thought, walking back across the causeway with the moat darkening beside us and the towers behind us slowly becoming silhouettes, the final question begins to gather. We've seen a sky fortress, a sunken city, a mountain temple, a cosmic diagram, a sacred bridge, and a universe built in stone. Each place can be explained in human terms, and yet each one also pushes against the edges of ordinary imagination. So the last step is not to choose too quickly between ancient humans and lost gods, between archaeology and wonder, between tools and myths. The last step is to ask what kind of knowledge can disappear, what kind of memory can survive, and why these old stones still make so many people feel that history may be deeper, stranger, and more awake than we were taught to believe. After Angkor Wat, with its towers rising like a stone version of the sacred mountain, the question that has followed us from the beginning becomes harder to avoid. We have moved from rock to sea, from cliff to temple, from carved circle to shallow ocean bridge, from Sri Lankan fortress to Cambodian cosmic city. Each place has its own history. Each place belongs to its own people, its own rulers, its own religious setting, its own landscape. Yet all of them seem to lean toward the same larger mystery. Why did ancient builders put so much effort into making stone behave like memory? Why did they shape mountains, coastlines, gardens, diagrams, and whole temple cities into things that still feel larger than the explanations we place beside them? This is where the idea of lost machines enters the story. It usually appears when the human mind reaches the edge of what it can easily imagine. A temple carved from the top down feels impossible, so perhaps there was a hidden cutting tool. A bridge appears across the sea, so perhaps there was a forgotten engineering method. A circular carving looks like a map of worlds, so perhaps it was a stargate. A palace rises above the jungle, so perhaps it belonged to beings who understood flight. Ancient texts describe vimanas, divine weapons, celestial journeys, and gods moving between realms, so perhaps those descriptions are not only poetry, but the faded memory of machines. It is a fascinating thought. It is also a dangerous one if we use it too quickly, because once we say lost machine, we may stop looking carefully at the people. We may forget the stonecutters holding tools in the heat, the sailors reading wind and current, the architects measuring shadows, the priests preserving calendars, the gardeners shaping water channels, the sculptors carving stories into walls, the workers carrying baskets of broken rock, the rulers using temples to place themselves inside cosmic order. If we rush too fast toward aliens, anti-gravity or hidden engines, we may miss the deeper miracle, which is that human societies were able to do these things with discipline, intelligence, and time. And yet, it would also be too simple to say there is no mystery here at all. There is mystery, real mystery. Not always the kind that glows blue and opens a doorway to another planet, though that would certainly make a museum visit more exciting. The mystery is in the missing knowledge. It is in the broken chain between the makers and us. We have the monuments, but not the full training systems that produced them. We have the stones, but not every instruction. We have myths, but not always the old context that made them clear. We have surviving texts, but many more must have been lost, damaged, rewritten, misunderstood, or never written down in the first place. We are reading a great book of civilization with many pages torn out, and some of the remaining pages are written in stone. This is perhaps the most reasonable way to speak of a lost civilization behind the megastructures. Not necessarily one single hidden empire with aircraft, energy beams and secret laboratories beneath the temples, but a lost depth of human knowledge spread across many cultures and many centuries. Knowledge of stone, knowledge of water, knowledge of sacred geometry, knowledge of astronomy, knowledge of ritual movement. Knowledge of how to organize thousands of people around an idea so powerful that they would spend years cutting, lifting, carving, aligning and polishing. That knowledge was real. Some of it survives, some of it does not. And when a skill disappears, the object it created can start to look supernatural. A modern person can look at Kailasa Temple and say, how could they possibly carve this from the mountain? But perhaps a master builder of that time, if brought forward into our century, would look at our confusion and smile gently, maybe a little tired from all the explaining. To him, the work would not be magic. It would be sequence, measurement, labour, and experience. He would know where to begin. He would know how the rock sounds when struck well. He would know how many workers could fit safely on a ledge. He would know how to leave enough stone for support. He would know how to correct small errors before they became disasters. To us, the method is partly invisible. To him, it may have been craft. That does not make the achievement smaller. It makes it more human and therefore more impressive. A machine can be impressive because it does what we cannot do alone. A civilization is impressive because it trains human beings to do what no individual could do alone. These megastructures are not only evidence of tools, they are evidence of coordination. They show that people once lived inside systems of meaning strong enough to control time, labour, landscape, and imagination. A king's command may have begun a project, but command alone cannot carve elegance into stone. Faith may have inspired a project, but faith alone cannot calculate weight, drainage, and proportion. Skill had to be there, planning had to be there, practice had to be there. Still, the old stories complicate everything. Vimanas, celestial chariots, divine weapons, serpent beings, cosmic mountains, bridges built by armies, cities swallowed by the sea, gods descending from the sky. If we treat all of this as literal technology, we may go too far. But if we treat it all as meaningless fantasy, we may go too far in the other direction. Myth does not behave like a laboratory report, but it can preserve memory. It can hold the emotional shape of real events. Floods become divine withdrawal. Lost cities become sacred warnings. Great builders become semi-divine figures. Skilled engineers become remembered as beings with impossible powers. A king's palace becomes a sky fortress. A sacred diagram becomes a map of worlds. A natural shoal becomes a bridge built by devotion. This is how memory works over long time. It does not keep everything in straight lines. It folds. It brightens some details and lets others fade. It turns history into story because story is easier to carry. A technical manual can be lost in one fire. A song can travel for 1,000 years. A building method can vanish when the master dies. A myth can survive in the mouth of a child. That does not make myth more accurate than archaeology, but it can make it more durable. Ancient civilizations knew this well. They carved stories into walls because stone lasted. They tied places to gods because sacred places were protected. They built temples as models of the cosmos because a building can teach without speaking. The idea of stargates may be a modern way of describing something ancient people already understood differently. A temple can be a gate, not because it opens into outer space, but because it moves a person from one state of mind to another. A pilgrimage crossing can be a gate. A sacred river can be a gate. A mandala can be a gate. A shrine can be a gate. A mountain can be a gate between earth and heaven. When modern mystery seekers use words like portal or energy center, they may be trying to explain the feeling of entering a space that was designed to change human awareness. The language may be new, the feeling is old. Anti-gravity works the same way in the imagination. We see huge stonework and ask how weight was overcome. The simplest modern answer is machinery, because that is how we overcome weight now. Cranes lift what our bodies cannot. Engines move what our muscles cannot. So when we see ancient stone moved or carved on a great scale, we imagine an older version of our own machines. But ancient builders often solved the problem differently. They used numbers of people, animal power, ramps, levers, sledges, rollers, water transport, careful quarrying and long planning. They did not remove weight from the world. They negotiated with it. That word matters. Negotiated. Ancient engineering was often a negotiation with material. Rock has habits, water has habits, sand has habits. Wood, rope, lime, pigment, metal and clay all have habits. Skilled builders learn those habits. They do not defeat nature so much as persuade it, slowly, through knowledge. At Sigiriya, water moves through channels because gravity was understood and used. At Kailasa, the temple remains because enough rock was removed and enough rock was spared. At Angkor, the city lived through systems that worked with seasonal water. At Dwarka, the sea reminds us what happens when coastlines change and human places become vulnerable. At Rama Setu, land and water meet in a shallow zone that seems made for story. These places are not evidence that ancient people ignored nature. They show that they watched it closely. The extraterrestrial idea comes from another kind of wonder. Ancient people described gods in the sky, so perhaps those gods were visitors. Ancient buildings align with the heavens, so perhaps they were built for contact. Ancient myths speak of powerful beings, so perhaps those beings came from elsewhere. It is an exciting thought, and it has filled many books, videos, and late-night conversations, but again, we should move carefully. There is no solid physical evidence that extraterrestrial beings built these sites. What we do have is evidence that humans everywhere look upward and fill the sky with meaning. The sky is vast. It changes. It gives light, rain, seasons, direction, and fear. It is natural that gods would live there in story. It is natural that kings would borrow its authority. It is natural that temples would align with it. The reptilian idea often grows from serpent imagery, especially Nagas. But serpent beings in South Asian and Southeast Asian traditions are far richer than modern reptilian theories. They belong to water, fertility, protection, hidden realms, treasure, and boundary places. They appear near rivers, underworlds, temple gates, and cosmic stories. They are not simply monsters. They are symbols of power that is close to the earth and often beneath ordinary sight. To turn every naga into an alien reptile is to flatten a very old symbol. But to ignore the nagas entirely is also to miss something important. Ancient people believed the visible world rested on unseen powers. Serpent imagery gave shape to those powers. It marked places where water, life, danger, and sacred protection met. So where does that leave us? Somewhere more interesting than yes or no. The strongest evidence points to human builders, human societies, human religious imagination, and human engineering. But those humans were not small. They were not simple. They were not waiting for modern people to come along and explain the world properly. They had their own sciences, their own sacred systems, their own methods of measurement, their own astronomical observations, their own architectural rules, their own ways of preserving memory. Some of those ways look strange to us because we have separated fields they kept together. We divide religion from engineering, astronomy from ritual, story from geography, art from mathematics. They often joined them. A temple could be mathematics in stone and devotion in stone at the same time. A bridge could be geology and faith at the same time. A city beneath the sea could be archaeology and sacred memory at the same time. A diagram could be cosmology and meditation at the same time. The ancient world did not always ask objects to choose one identity. That may be one of the things we have lost. Perhaps the lost civilization is not hidden under a single ruin, but hidden in this integrated way of thinking. The ability to see the world as connected. Mountain connected to God. River connected to purification. Direction connected to ritual. Number connected to harmony. King connected to cosmos. City connected to sacred order. Ocean connected to both danger and passage. We still have pieces of this view in the monuments, but the full living system is difficult to recover. We can measure the walls, but measurement alone does not tell us how a pilgrim felt. We can identify the stone, but not always the song sung while it was placed. We can map the plan, but not always the silence in the sanctuary at dawn. That silence is part of the evidence too, though not in the way a sample in a lab is evidence. It is evidence of intention. These places were designed to create response. Awe, humility, fear, devotion, memory, royal loyalty, cosmic orientation. When a modern visitor feels wonder at Kailasa or Angkor or Sigiriya, that response may not be an accident. The builders wanted the human body to feel scale. They wanted the eyes to rise. They wanted the mind to slow down. They wanted the ordinary world to feel rearranged. In that sense, the monuments are still functioning. They still do what they were made to do, even if the original rituals have changed or faded. This is why the question of lost machines may be less important than the question of lost purposes. A machine can be impressive, but purpose is what makes a civilization. Why build something that takes so much labour? Why carve a mountain instead of building a smaller shrine? Why place a palace on a rock? Why make a temple city into a cosmic map? Why remember a bridge across the sea for so many centuries? Why speak of a city swallowed by water long after the waves have erased its streets? These questions lead us closer to the builders than any fantasy engine does. They ask what people loved, feared, worshipped, and wanted to leave behind. The answer, again and again, seems to be permanence. Human life is short. Stone lasts longer, dynasties fall, mountains remain, voices vanish, carvings endure. A person may die, but a temple can keep repeating the person's worldview to strangers 1,000 years later. This is the bargain ancient builders made with time. They could not stop it, but they could slow its forgetting. They could leave behind forms so large, so strange, and so beautiful that later ages would have to ask questions. And we are still asking. We ask at Sigiriya whether power can lift itself into the sky and become legend. We ask at Dwarka whether a sacred city may sleep beneath the sea, or whether the sea has carried fragments of a memory too old to fully recover. We ask at Kailasa how a mountain could be carved as if the temple had been waiting inside it. We ask at Sequala Chakraya what kind of universe was drawn in that circular stone. We ask at Rama Setu whether faith, geography and epic memory can meet in a line across the water. We ask at Angkor Wat how a kingdom could build a model of the cosmos large enough to walk through. None of these questions requires us to deny archaeology. Good archaeology is not the enemy of wonder. It is one of wonder's best tools. It teaches us that ancient people had names, materials, methods, dates, trade routes, patrons, failures, repairs, and changing beliefs. It keeps mystery from becoming laziness. But wonder is also not the enemy of archaeology. Wonder is often what brings people to the site in the first place. It is what makes them care about an old wall instead of walking past it. The best approach lets evidence guide the mind without letting the mind become dull. So perhaps the lost Hindu civilization behind these megastructures is not waiting to be discovered as one dramatic headline. Perhaps it is already visible, but only in fragments. In Sanskrit stories of flying palaces and cosmic battles, in temple plans shaped like sacred diagrams, in stone bridges of belief across difficult water, in carvings of gods and serpents, in underwater anchors, in mountain temples, in royal gardens, in the spread of Hindu cosmology into Cambodia and beyond, in the memory of builders whose names are gone but whose decisions still stand in rock. It may not be a civilization of machines as we imagine machines. It may be a civilization of meaning so strong that they organized machines of another kind. Social machines, ritual machines, memory machines, architectural machines. A temple is a machine for focusing attention. A pilgrimage route is a machine for preserving story. A myth is a machine for carrying memory through generations. A sacred landscape is a machine for making the earth readable. These machines do not need metal engines. They run on repetition, devotion, teaching, and awe. They are slow machines, but they last. That does not close the door on every unknown. There may still be discoveries waiting beneath water, under soil, behind collapsed stones, or in texts not yet fully understood. Coastlines may hold older settlements. Monuments may contain construction secrets not yet reconstructed. Archaeology is not finished. History is not finished. The past is not a solved puzzle sitting neatly on a shelf. It is more like an old city under layers of dust, where every cleared room leads to another wall, another doorway, another question. But the more we discover, the more careful we should become, because real discoveries are more valuable than easy exaggerations. The ancient builders deserve that care. They do not need us to rescue them from their own humanity by turning them into students of aliens or servants of vanished super beings. They deserve to be seen as people capable of greatness. At the same time, they do not need to be reduced to simple labourers with no deep knowledge beyond muscle and obedience. They were thinkers, planners, observers, artists, ritual specialists and engineers in the language of their own age. The space between those two mistakes is where the truth may rest. And maybe, after all this, the most moving thought is that these megastructures were never meant to answer only one question. They were meant to hold many. Who are we under the sky? Where is the centre of the world? How does a king show his power? How does a community honour a god? How can stone carry a story? What survives after water, war, jungle, weather and time have done their work? The monuments do not reply in speech. They reply by remaining. As our journey settles toward its quiet end, we can let the strange theories drift through the room like harmless sparks. Vimanas crossing ancient skies, stargates hidden in circular carvings, anti-gravity stones floating over the sea, serpent beings guarding water and treasure, visitors from the stars mistaken for gods. These images are vivid, and they show how strongly the old sites still affect the modern imagination. But beneath those sparks is something steadier. Human hands, human memory, human devotion, human skill stretched across time until it almost becomes unbelievable. That may be the real lost technology, the ability to build with centuries in mind. to make something not for a season, not for a market, not for a quick use, but for the deep future. To carve, align, polish and raise stone so that people not yet born would stand before it and feel their own world become larger. We have many machines today, but we do not always build with that kind of patience. We move quickly, we replace quickly, we forget quickly. The ancient stones ask us to slow down. So, if tonight's journey has carried you from the jungle heights of Sigiriya to the sea at Dwarka, from the carved mountain of Kailasa to the quiet circle of Sakwala Chakraya, from the sacred shallows of Rama Setu to the cosmic towers of Angkor Wat, then perhaps you have felt the same thing that keeps drawing people back to these places. Not certainty, something gentler and more lasting than certainty, a sense that the past was wide, a sense that ancient people knew how to join earth and heaven in ways we're still learning to read, a sense that even when the machines are missing, the memory remains. And now, wherever you are listening from, whether it is morning, evening, or the deep, soft middle of the night, you are part of that memory too for a little while. You have walked these old places in thought. You have stood before the stone without needing to solve it too quickly. If this slow journey brought you calm, curiosity, or a little wonder before sleep, I would be grateful if you liked the video, subscribed, and stayed close for the next quiet road through the mysteries of our planet. The stones will still be there when we wake. The sea will keep moving over its hidden shapes. The old temples will keep holding their shadows. And somewhere beneath the legends of gods, machines, bridges, and lost worlds, the ancient builders will remain, not gone exactly, but waiting in the work they left behind, asking us to look again.